Okay, welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning and Development Control Committee. My name is Councillor Rachel Layton. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. I will be chairing this evening's meeting. If I lose my connection at any point and can't chair the meeting, then our Vice Chair, Councillor Matt Uberoy, will be taking over for me. I'd just like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. Please can you keep your microphones on mute unless you're speaking. When prompted, you may indicate you wish to speak, but please wait until I call on you before speaking fully. And I also ask that members keep their questions and comments brief and to the point. If any councillor leaves the meeting or loses connection during an item, we will pause and wait a few moments for them to reconnect. If a councillor is not present for a substantial part of the discussion, then they won't be able to vote on that item. The quorum for this meeting is 4 members of the committee. If we have fewer than 4 members in attendance, then I will adjourn the meeting. I will now move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We have no apologies this evening. Moving on to item 2, we have a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. I will call on members in alphabetical order. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations of interest, please just say present. So if I can begin with Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Harcourt.
Present.
Councillor Carmel.
Present.
Councillor Perez.
Present.
Councillor Sadiq.
Present.
Councillor Thorley.
Present Chair, with respect to item 4, I have to declare a non-pecuniary interest. I have a relative who lives on Fabian Road and a relative who lives on Harsmere Road. I have not discussed the application with them and therefore I do not consider it a pecuniary interest, but would like to declare it for the sake of transparency. So I will be staying and voting on that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorley. And Councillor Uberoy.
Present.
Thank you. Okay, in which case I will now move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of September. I'll now call on each member in turn to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. If you agree the minutes, please just say agreed. If not, please say not agreed and explain why. So if I can begin with Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel.
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
Councillor Uberoy.
Agreed.
And I also agree the minutes. Okay, in which case, if I can just now move on to a change in the order of the agenda this evening. So in view of the overall number of registered speakers we have this evening, I would like to propose the order of the agenda is changed as follows. So if we can begin with Edith Summerskill House, followed by both St Paul's Girls' Schools applications, followed by 104 King Street, and then finally moving on to Michael Road. Is anyone willing to second that proposal?
Seconded.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carmel. Okay, in which case then we will begin with Edith Summerskill House. If I can ask the presenting officer, Peter Wilson, to please introduce the report. And Peter, I'll just wait a few moments so that you have an opportunity to share your screen with us.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Hopefully you can see the screen. So the item before you this evening is Edith Summerskill House. I'd like to draw members' attention to the circulated addendum report, which, in addition to the corrections and clarifications listed as usual, members will note that there has been a receipt of representations set out on behalf of an objector relating to the methodology and assessment carried out by the applicant with regard to heritage and TVIA townscape and views impact assessment views. Officers have revisited the judgments that are set out within the report in light of these submissions and remain of the view as reached by independent assessment of the proposal as is set out within the main officer's report that has been circulated to you within the agenda. The application relates to the site of the former Edith Summerskill house, which is located on the Clem-Attlee estate, which was a 60-metre residential tower, which has since been demolished. And the site is now vacant. The proposal consists of the erection of a 20-storey, 78.77 metre residential tower, which comprises 133 residential units, 100% affordable affordable housing, which comprises itself 105 social rented units and 28 intermediate rent units. The tower features a single-storey basement for plant, an ancillary ground floor community room and kitchen, and public realm landscaping, highway and improvements within and with that surrounding the site. This slide shows the estate looking east, with the site is to the right of the image and is shaded red in here.
That slide, oh, that down, right.
Sorry, Councillor.
Councillor, we can't hear you. You're on mute, but if we can let Peter just continue with the rest of the presentation, and if we could take questions once we've heard from all of our speakers as well. So Peter, if you can continue.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry. So the application site is this area located in shaded in red. To the right of the image, which is south of the site, are 2-storey Victorian terraces, which is St Thomas's Way here. And to the north of the site is the Clem-Attlee estate. And on the left of the image is the 18-storey, 60-metre Herbert Morrison house, and 2 11-storey buildings here onto Lily Road, running east to west to the north of the estate. The extent of the application boundary is shown here in relation to the neighbouring buildings, and the outline of the former building is located centrally here. This is the red line boundary of the application. This image shows the overall footprint of the actual building as proposed within the application boundary. The building is 2 overlapping squares, as so, and the application boundary down onto St Thomas's Way to the south. The arrows indicating routes into the building, on-site landscaping areas as well. The line to the bottom of the image, this is the black line here, indicates approximately the building line of Nye Bevan House to the west and George Lindgren House to the east. This George Lindgren house here, as shown on this image, which we have the ground floor arrangement of the building in relation to the neighbouring buildings and the uses with active frontages. The large arrow indicates the new access from St Thomas's Way through the estate to the north. And the proposed community use is in this area to the north of the building with an active edge onto the playground. This image shows the proposed building when viewed from outside Herbert Morrison House, looking to the south. Building to the left is John Strachey House. This image shows the southern ground floor elevation that was presented onto St Thomas's Way. The archway access is set to the right. The east is on the right hand image, and the new public realm that was indicated on the previous plan is located onto the street. The proposal would see 7 residential units per floor, the majority of the aspects being dual aspect, around 70%, apart from 2 one-bedroom flats located to this corner. The units exceed the London Plan space standards, with the amenity areas being internalised. It is considered that this results in a high quality of accommodation for these future occupants. Wheelchair units are set to the lower floors, as shown on this diagram here, on these 4 floors. And the top floor features a recessed plant area. I pass over to my colleague, Alan Jones, who will take us through some of the views.
Thanks, Peter. So if we can just go on to the first one. So as in within section 5.3.72 of the report, the application is supported by a fully detailed timescape and visual impact assessment that includes 28 views around the site. We have got that document available, but I think just for the purposes of the presentation, we've extracted 7 key views just to give a flavour of the views that you get from kind of the longer range to shorter range as we go forward. So the first one here is a view from Harbord Street and Stevenage Road in the Crabtree Conservation Area. So as you can see on the left, the existing composition of that view is on the left-hand side, and on the right you can see within the termination of the vista of that view, the new building just popping up on the right-hand side of that image. If we can go on to the next one, Peter. Okay, and the second one then is the junction of St Peter's Terrace and Filmer Road, which is in the Central Fawn Conservation Area. Now, again, this image is a bit, sorry, it isn't a fully rendered elevational drawing of the building, but you can see on the left, this is the existing composition with the tall building as part of the existing Clematley estate within the centre of the image there. On the right, if you see the green kind of figure line drawing is where the new building would sit within that context. Next one, please, Peter. So more localised, these are the views from the southwest corner of the cemetery of the Church of St Thomas of Canterbury. So as you can see, the existing church and its spire in the centre of the view, with some of the other curtilage-listed structures prevalent within the cemetery itself. On the right-hand side, as you can see, the new building sitting behind the profile of the main church building, and the spire punctuating above that within the skyline. Next one, please, Peter. So again, this is just the same viewpoint, but just taken slightly further north, sorry, just to actually illustrate kind of a dead-on view of the church and the building sitting behind it. So again, the same kind of influences involved. So firstly, the main church building is kind of at the centre of the view with the existing terraces on either side. And again, the curtilage listed structures within the cemetery itself are clear in view. Again, the new building would sit behind the church in this viewpoint at a localised level. And again, the detail of that is reported in the report. The next one, Peter. Okay, so we're just coming out slightly within the Central Fawn Conservation Area. So this is a view from Dawes Road and Sherbrooke Road. So as you can see, the church that we've just discussed, again, is in the centre of the image here. So you can see the spire and the top of the church and its kind of key architectural features within that view. And then as you look into the right-hand view, you can see where the new building would sit in relation to the existing church building and existing Victorian terraces. Next one, please, Peter. So again, a similar view from within Walham Green Conservation Area. So this is from Fulham Broadway looking northwest. So you can see an existing late development on the right-hand side of the road here. Quite clear in the centre is obviously the church building, and is kind of the key core of the conservation area as it stands. You can see that just punctuating above some of the kind of buildings that amass that in the foreground. And then again, on the right-hand side of the image, you can see that view and how that view changes with the new building, just situated, due west of the, not due west, situated just to the left of the existing church building. Next one, please, Peter. So this again is taking the same view as we have within the other church building. So you can see the church building here at the core of the warm green conservation area, and now again the wireframe that just sits behind that on the right is where the building will be seen within the setting of that building, and again within a background view back from the existing buildings that kind of enclose the existing church and its curtilage. And next slide, I think it's the last view.
That's the last view. Thank you, Alan.
That's great. So they're all the views there. But as I say, if members have any questions when we come on to it, we do have the remaining 21 views within the TVIA available if we need to view those as well.
Thank you, Alan. So in conclusion, the officer's assessment has been carried out in the report that's before you, and it has been identified that there is an element of conflict identified with the council's local plan tall building policy DC3, which has been accorded significant weight. However, having regard to the extent of the compliance with other important and relevant development plan policies, it is considered that this does not result in the proposal being in conflict with the development plan when it is read as a whole. The proposed development is therefore considered to accord with the development plan when considered as a whole, as set out and following the assessment in the officer's report. Members will also note that there is other important material considerations that support the grant of planning permission, which are set out in the main officer's report and the agenda, and include the delivery of a number of significant public benefits and the acceptability of proposed development when assessed on a systematic basis against relevant factors identified in policy. Those other material considerations set out should be afforded significant weight, and it is the view of officers that this would be sufficient to justify the grant of planning permission, even if a different judgment were to be reached on the question of the overall compliance with the development plan. Accordingly, it is recommended that the proposed development be granted planning permission, subject to the conditions listed in the report and the completion of the 106 as per the heads of terms set out in the officer's report and the addendum that has been circulated, and of course subject to no contrary direction from the Mayor of London at stage 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, if I can now invite our speakers speaking in objection to this application. So if I can begin with Mr. Richard Turney. Mr. Turney, if you'd like to unmute your microphone. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, Mr. Turney, you'll have 3 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll let you know when your time is up. I'm going to be quite strict on time this evening, just because we've got so many applications and so many speakers this evening. So, Mr. Turney, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I live on Fabian Road with my wife and 3 small children. We've lived here for 5 years and I've lived in Fulham for 10 years. I'd just say at the outset, I'm a planning barrister, but I'm speaking entirely in a personal capacity here. I've taken a really keen interest in the redevelopment of this site. I strongly support its reuse for the provision of new, affordable and social housing. When an application first came before the committee, it was misdirected on 2 big issues. That's the impacts being assessed against the original building on site and being told that the scheme accorded with your tall buildings policy. And for that reason, I very reluctantly brought judicial review proceedings and the permission was quashed. Now, those 2 factors, I think, make a really profound difference to your consideration. And in short, this is just the wrong scheme. The council controls the site. It can decide what scheme comes forward here without pressure from developers or anyone else. First of all, it's wrong for Fulham. It's too tall. It's too bulky. It's 20 metres taller than what was there before. It's almost double the volume. It will dominate the surrounding streets, which immediately adjoin it. It's almost 80 metres compared to 12-metre building heights. It will signal difference detachment, and a lack of integration, and it will be seen throughout Fulham. As has been noted, I've commissioned an independent assessment which has critiqued the reports that you've been provided with. I can't mention all the viewpoints, but St Thomas's Church, Grade 2 star listed, highest national significance, the best Pugin church in London. This will completely dominate it. Historic England have taken the rare step of objecting. They rarely do that. They've said it will cause serious harm to the setting of the building. And then the historic buildings around St John's Church, it will again dominate those. You've seen the views, but the applicant has not put in a full assessment of those viewpoints. It's the wrong scheme for the council. There is no economic justification for building this high, and it ignores your local plan. You have identified where tall buildings should go in the borough, and it is not here. You've clearly identified those locations, and this proposal is a complete departure from that. And it's the wrong scheme for the Clem Attlee estate. I don't pretend to represent the residents of the estate, but the scheme is of huge density and height. It will literally throw the rest of the estate into shadow, and there's no additional play or amenity space proposed. What is there will be absolutely overwhelmed. You could have a well-designed tall building of, say, 10 stories here. It could be accommodated on the site. It would deliver fewer homes, of course, but it would still deliver 50, 60, 70 homes, largely avoiding the adverse impacts, and make a really positive contribution to the borough. And the missed opportunity is going to play out for years and years. You will look around and see the tall building throughout Fulham and the lasting harm to the heritage assets. So for those reasons, I'd encourage you to refuse permission this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Turney. Okay, if I can just ask you to put your microphone on mute. Oh, great, you've done it for me there. If I can invite Kate Lamont to unmute her microphone and address committee. Kate, can you hear me? Wonderful, Kate. Okay, Kate, you also have 3 minutes, and whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Sorry, apologies. Sorry, I'm having to manage this around my childcare, so sorry.
That's quite all right. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'd like to address you about the community consultation on this proposal. As far as I'm aware, it's been non-existent in relation to the proposal that's before you today. There was a consultation in 2016. That consultation did involve community engagement in the project, but since 2016 we are living in a very different world. The residents that live locally are well aware and will have in their minds a number of the important social events that have occurred both in this city and in this and for all of us over the last few years, in particular Grenfell, and whether or not it is really an attractive proposition or socially responsible proposition to provide your social housing by building up and up, as this proposal does, and also the impacts of the COVID-19 lockdown, which have involved families throughout the country being restricted to their homes for prolonged periods, and whether or not one considers that it is socially responsible to require people to do that on the 18th floor of a tower block. I would ask the court, ask the committee to consider that. And those are reasons why it's really important to have had further consultation with the community, and there hasn't been that. In fact, I was only notified that this committee meeting was going to happen on Friday. I did know, I had knowledge that it was, but I had asked to be notified, and I was only notified on Friday. In terms of why I think this is the wrong proposal for Fulham, I am very concerned about the lack of amenity investment that this proposal has with it. The playground in Clem Attlee estate is very small. There are some lovely small gardens. It's neatly kept and it's a nice place, but this will quite literally make it a less comfortable place to be. And that is identified within the council's own modelling of the impacts of the light and also of the wind direction, the wind travel that this very large construction will have on that area. So it will make it a less pleasant place to be for the residents of the Clement Attlee estate. That has not been consulted upon, not very clearly, and people haven't been given the opportunity to understand what the impact of this will be. And I think that's very concerning from a socio-political perspective. I think that really this project is the wrong one social housing must be built. There is a desperate need for it. I completely agree. We need to build social housing on that site. This is the wrong design, the wrong building, and please consider exploring the possibility of looking at Watermeadow Court, which the council now has in its control, and considering whether a 2-location development which could provide more or the same amount of needed social housing is not a far more proportionate and justifiable departure from the local plans and the
All right,
mayor's.
Ms Lamont, that's your time, but thank you very much for coming along and addressing committee this evening. Thank you very much. If you now want to just put your microphone on mute for me. Thank you very much. Okay, if I can invite Stephanie Thorogood to address committee. Stephanie, if you can unmute your microphone for us. Hi there, Stephanie. So Stephanie, you have 6 minutes in which to address committee this evening, and whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My name's Stephanie and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant. This development will provide 133 much needed new homes in Fulham, all of them affordable. The building is of the highest design quality and will also deliver substantial additional benefits for the local community, including a new community hall for use by the residents of the building and the wider Clematley estate. The site is currently vacant following completion of the demolition of Edith Summerskill House in 2019. That building was constructed in the 1960s. It was made of a reinforced concrete frame, had substandard floor-to-ceiling heights and contained asbestos. It was not fit for purpose on health and safety grounds, and so the council decided to demolish it and redevelop the site for new affordable housing. This development will replace the 68 homes that were lost when the previous building was demolished and will also deliver an additional 65 new homes, all affordable and all meeting modern standards in a new landmark building of architectural excellence. This is not the first time that an application for a new building on this site has come before this committee. A similar scheme was granted planning permission by the council in October 2019. However, as you've heard, it was the subject of a judicial review legal challenge by a local resident, which resulted in the council's decision being quashed. Had it not been for that legal challenge, the building would now be under construction. Instead of abandoning the project, however, the applicant decided to update the application and submit it to the council again for approval in order to ensure that those much needed affordable homes previously approved can go ahead and be built. This new application therefore seeks planning permission for a very similar development in terms of height, design approach and number of new affordable homes, but with some minor design improvements that have resulted from further discussions with an affordable housing provider. The scheme will deliver many benefits to the local community, including a 100% affordable housing scheme with 20% intermediate homes and 80% social rented. The redevelopment of a vacant site that was always intended to have a replacement building constructed on it. A new landmark building of the highest design quality that maximises the number of new homes on the site. A new community hall. Improved public realm around the building with better pedestrian links through the Clematley estate. New landscaping and play space enhancements. And significant local employment opportunities through apprenticeships, work placements, and the use of local supply chains for trades. These public benefits should be given significant weight, particularly the delivery of 133 new affordable homes in an area of significant local housing need. We therefore ask the committee to grant planning permission for these improved plans, just as planning permission was granted by the council for the previous proposals. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie. If you can put your microphone on mute for me as well, thank you. Okay, I'll now move on to members' comments and questions. And just a reminder to members to try and keep their questions brief if they can, because we've got a lot of business this evening. So are there any members that would like to kick us off with any questions? Councillor Thorley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to start us off. Obviously, we've had this scheme before, and there was a judicial review, and the applicant said in her submission this evening that the scheme before us is basically the same as before, besides some kind of minor design improvements. So I'd just like to understand given the scheme is substantially the same, what was the issue with the prior application? What were the grounds for the JR, and how have they been addressed by this new application?
Peter, are you able to take that question from Councillor Thorley?
Yes, through the chair. My legal colleagues may wish to comment further after myself, Councillor. In short, the previous building was in the process of being demolished at the time the previous application went before committee. Planning permission was resolved. In the interim, prior to the issuing of the decision notice and the actual planning permission, the building was demolished. And therefore the baseline assessment of the scheme had changed, and the JR challenge that was brought centred around that the application should be assessed against the baseline of a now vacant site rather than predicated on the acceptability of the previous building. So the difference is in that regard is that the planning submission itself and the documents are assessed against the baseline of a vacant site as opposed to a site that features a 60-metre building. There have been some minor design changes. They're principally revolve around the structural composition of the building, the way it's actually put together in terms of the facades and the concrete layering, and there has been a minor change in height. There's around 1.5 metre reduction, and there has been an updated revision in terms of the energy strategy and so on, the actual efficiencies of the building.
Thank you for that. So just so I'm clear, that the prior planning application was assessed against the old 68-storey tower, or sorry, 68 flat tower, and that was incorrect, and it should have been adjudicated against a flat scheme. Is that, have I understood that correctly?
Councillor Thorley, it's Punham from legal. Yes, that's correct. By the time the decision was issued, the tall building had been demolished, so the assessment, obviously the decision had been made at a time when the circumstances had somewhat changed, so that needs to be taken into consideration.
So just unless anyone wants to comment on this particular JR point, to move on to height, which I suppose links into that.
Councillor Thorley, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it's been noted in the officer's report that this is not a site identified. There are a large number of sites identified in Hammersmith and Fulham that are felt to be appropriate for tall buildings. There obviously in the immediate area are 3 relatively large blocks, but this block, I think I'm right in saying, would be taller than all 3 of those blocks. It is, as I say, not a site that's been identified as appropriate for tall buildings. Why are officers of the view, having done all the assessment previously and said, well, we don't think tall buildings are appropriate here, that they feel tonight, even though we have a scheme before us that is slightly lower than what was consented previously, that such a tower is the right thing in this location?
Through the chair, thank you. Alan, are you able to comment on the acceptability of the tall building in the location?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Peter. So I think just to go back into the terms of the report, I think the report is quite clear in terms of the reasons and how we've assessed the application for a tall building outside of a designated area for tall buildings. So just bear with me a second. I just want to find the right paragraph to refer members to. Okay, so yeah, so if members in the report, it's section 5.3.27 and section 5.328, which covers off London Plan Policy 7.7, which is a key material consideration of this application. So the current London Plan, in terms of the policy, does set a plan-led approach to tall buildings throughout London. And again, that is part of the policy which our local plan through policy DC3 promotes certain areas where tall buildings will be promoted. The second part of the policy, in parts B to D of the policy, sets out an assessment framework for applications for tall and large buildings. And that's the approach that's been taken with this occasion. So it's recognised that in terms of our own policy, there is a degree of non-compliance in terms of not being a plan-led tall building location. But in terms of the fallback upon that, then the policy elements of parts B to D of London Plan Policy 7.7 become the key kind of assessment framework for the prevalence of a tall building.
Thank you for that. So in effect, if I've understood that correctly, it's acknowledged that it doesn't comply with our element in terms of tall buildings, but on balance, because of the wider benefits, it's felt acceptable in the context. Is that really what I, without having read all the various subsections you mentioned, is that in effect what you're telling me?
So just to be clear and clarify this, Councillor, I think it's really important to kind of consider the extent of the parts B to D of the policy. So it isn't just about the public benefits of the scheme, it's actually about, within particularly part B, there are a number of assessment criteria that apply to applications for tall buildings. So they're covered off in part 5.329 of the report through to, section, so I'm just trying to get the right section here, through to, 5.340, which could, 5.3.41, sorry, I do apologise, that cover off the kind of key.
You couldn't do page numbers while you do it. It's quite tricky. Yes, page numbers.
It's pages 64 to 66 of the report. These actually cover the key criteria of the policy, which create, as I say, that framework for assessment of a tall building. So it isn't just the other public benefits that are taken on part of this consideration, they actually become part of the wider planning balance that I'm sure we can go on to in terms of the latter conclusion of the report, but they are the main elements of the policy. The latter part of page 66 then cover off the other elements of the criteria that also consider and make up that framework in terms of how we assess the kind of suitability of a tall building, particularly outside of a plan-led tall building location.
Thank you very much for that. I won't go on excessively about the height. I mean, anything I will note is obviously we've had applications in the past, as some members may be aware, there were large Y blocks on the Ralston Road frontage where a decision was taken when we redeveloped that to build low rise, which I think actually, with the benefit of hindsight, was the right decision there. So I think it is disappointing that's not an approach that's been taken here. But I've had my say on height. I will now hand back to you, Chair, and I've got a few other questions later if they're not covered by members, but I think I've said my bit for now.
Thank you, Councillor Thorley. Councillor Ubori, if I can come to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief because Councillor Thorley drilled down into the issue I did want to speak about and ask about, the local plan and tall buildings. I really like this application in many ways, and I think we all support the benefits that come with a 100% affordable housing building. It's something as a council we should be very proud of, the fact that we're trying to introduce it. I just wish it was being introduced in a tower block that was 20 metres shorter and wasn't exceeding the previous building or current footprint, so to speak. I just wondered, do we have any images comparing the existing, well, the previous building and this one side by side, so we can see the actual impact of 20 metres as if we were actually looking at it?
I think if officers do have those, it may take them a while to dig them out. And also, I would say, actually, I wonder whether we should see those, bearing in mind what we're comparing at the moment is the vacant site with this taller building. But if officers do have those to hand, perhaps they could dig those out, with the caveat that committee is aware that we're comparing this to the vacant site. Councillor Ubor, whilst an officer looks for that, do you have any other questions on that?
I don't know. My main point I'm trying to make is that I'm incredibly sympathetic to residents' point of views about the scale of this building, if it exceeds what was currently there before, which is why I was curious to see an image about it and actually assess the impact of it. It's my only point, however, and if it does take long, or indeed if it's not possible to get an image comparing side by side, I completely understand. No further comments.
Mr. Wilson, do we have that image, or Alan, do we have that image?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a direct image. I might be able to dig out a wireframe that shows the silhouette of the previous building. What I do have is, just bear with me a second.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is this image, if we can, is that on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. So this is, to the foreground is the proposed building. And what we have here in the rear is Herbert Morrison House. Now, Herbert Morrison House was effectively a twin, if you like, of the previous Edith Summerskill that was on the site. So obviously there is a slight difference in terms of perspective. And here we have it in section looking east. So St Thomas's Way is here, the Victorian terraces to the south on the right of the image. So this is roughly the kind of the building that used to be there compared to the building that's being proposed, although they are different buildings. And I think it, as has been noted by the chair, it is important to reinforce that the building, the proposal before you has been assessed on the basis of a vacant site, and its acceptability as recommended is on that basis, on its own merits. It has been found to be accepted and recommended for planning permission to be granted.
Thank you for explaining that, and thank you for digging out the image. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ilbroy. Councillor Harcourt, can I come to you next?
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. Sticking with the issue around height, and I note in 5.3.48 on page 67, it talks about the skyline and it not being disruptive or any harmful impact on the skyline. Could somebody please explain to me how they've reached that particular conclusion? And then I have one more question, which is again to do with a view to St Thomas's of Canterbury. Come to that in a second.
Okay, thank you. So if I take this point first of all, and if Peter's got anything to add in. So I think obviously in terms of, as I mentioned within the presentation, we have had a fully detailed townscape visual impact assessment submitted with the application, as is the standard process with an application for a large or tall building. Now that has assessed quite a number, as I say, 28 viewpoints around the site, which obviously consider how a tall building within that setting would actually impact upon views, and what the kind of cumulative scale of impact will be. Now, the policy test within our own policy 7.7 is about having a harmful and disruptive impact upon the skyline. Now, there isn't any, because of the nature of the site, within that policy, there isn't any kind of subsequent framework within which we can then use to drill into that any further. So we've used policy 7.7 of the London Plan in conjunction with the submitted information to assess the proposal. And so what you'll see within other parts of the report, and if I just kind of give you a reference on those, so that's on pages 71 through to 73. Sorry, 72, sorry. That covers off the range of views and groups those around kind of key assets around different areas. I think what officers have been clear to understand is the fact that, and I don't know if Peter, you can get the image up of the kind of the aerial photograph of the site. I think that might be quite helpful just to understand the site in its context.
Sorry, this one, Alan.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. So I think obviously what we've looked at as part of the TVI assessment is around some of the existing receptors within the local area in terms of that test. So as Peter mentioned earlier on in the presentation, there are already within the Clementley estate a number of tall building elements. It has to be recognised that this is a tall building beyond those, but actually that in part some of that impact and upon the skyline would actually be reduced to a point because of the coalescence of the building with those existing buildings and actually how that would relate. From other viewpoints as well, because of the sensitivity of some of the views, there will be some negative impacts. However, there will also be beneficial impacts from that because of the design quality of the scheme and also providing kind of a legible wayfinding marker to the site as described within the report. So in terms of the addition to the skyline, because of that quality, overall officers consider that it wouldn't have a harmful disruptive impact upon the skyline, notwithstanding that there will be some localised impacts that are that are referenced within the report and considering the design and heritage balance.
Okay, thank you for that. Look, I mean, the various views you showed do demonstrate that what the impact is likely to be. The one area I have of concern was that view where the proposed building is immediately behind St Thomas of Canterbury's church. If we can have a quick look at that one. And obviously, I think that's more than less than harmful, and how you are justifying that particular issue.
Thanks, Peter. So I think, again, one of the things in terms of, because this is a Grade 2 star listed building, we have consulted Historic England on this. Now, I think the comments from Historic England are, in some way, they do help to kind of clarify the situation in part, given the fact that within the comments, Historic England do comment upon the fact that despite their reservations about this causing serious harm in terms of the MPPF test, they do comment that this is less than substantial harm as well. And that's a similar view to what the applicant's heritage consultant and officers ourselves kind of brought forward in terms of our views, in terms of balancing this within the report. That said, the report does conclude that there are, there is heritage harm caused by the proposal upon the setting of the Grade 2 star listed building. That is acknowledged in the report. The other elements in terms of the public benefits of the scheme are commented upon within the design conclusion, but also more critically within the wider planning balance conclusion around what those actual benefits would be that outweigh that harm. So I think the Historic England comment, although it raises an objection, it does give us quite a clear steer to kind of reaffirm officers' own viewpoint that the scale of harm is less than substantial overall. And I think that's quite helpful just in terms of understanding how this relates to the existing building. So I think, as I tried to mention as we were going through the report, I think one of the key parts that we can get lost upon with these kind of fixed viewpoints is the fact that, the harm in these two viewpoints from the cemetery is where the harm to the existing building will be at its most significant. So there will be other dynamic viewpoints around the site where the harm won't be as extreme as this is in terms of that less than substantial harm, and therefore we are showing you kind of the worst parts of this harm overall. I think in terms of the design and heritage balance, we've also considered the fact that as a backdrop to the existing quality of the building, that there are, in terms of the existing building and the new build element, the new build would introduce a high quality backdrop to that development, albeit that there still will be some harm to the setting of the listed building overall. So I think, Councillor, just going back to your point, I think we recognise that there is heritage harm caused by the scheme. Again, Historic England and ourselves both agree that that is towards the less than substantial harm range as defined by the MPPF. And members do need to take a view, as officers have in the conclusions of the report, as to whether that harm is outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme in line with paragraph 196 of the MPPF.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I hear what you're saying about less than substantial harm, and the judgment call is then whether the public benefit outweighs that. That's fine, and that's a judgment I'll make. You mentioned that's just one particular view from the cemetery looking at the setting of that church. There are other views of that church which presumably are not affected. Is that right? As far as I'm aware.
Yeah, so there are other views within the townscape assessment. I don't know whether, Pete, you can bring the other one up, the localised view. I mean, I think, again, there are other views, again, within the central Fulham conservation area that are kind of impacted as well by the scheme. I think that's acknowledged in the report. Now, again, officers consider those impacts to be, again, towards the lower end of less than substantial harm, given the fact that, in part, the development from a number of those viewpoints would have in some way heritage harm, but also in the kind of flipping of that balance in terms of townscape considerations, provide a wayfinding and landmark marker towards the Clematley estate. And therefore that's carefully balanced in that consideration. So this view here is quite important. So again, although the view does have some impact on the setting of the Grade 2 star listed building, you can quite clearly read the listed building separate from the new build element, and there isn't any coalescence between the two buildings in this view or a number of the other views that have been selected for consideration. So the two views from the cemetery, which aren't actually publicly accessible, are the ones where that impact is going to be more significant, and again towards the less than substantial harm, sort of range of the harm. So again, that's where officers are trying to strike a balance in terms of understanding the harm, but also positive regeneration benefits of the scheme from a townscape perspective.
Okay, that's it from me for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perez, can I come to you next?
Thank you very much, Chair. We heard from Ms. Lamont how she felt that the consultation was not right. I just want to know what was the extent of the consultation process, how did you reach out to residents, representatives of residents as well, and other stakeholders, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, through the chair. Yes, I mean, from a planning authority, we widely consulted as is set out within the report, and we extended the consultation period beyond the statutory 21 days to allow for comments to be received, and consulted by letter, site advert, and site notice and press advert as is set out in detail in the report, Councillor. The applicant, HFS Developments, of which the council is a partner with a joint venture with Stanhope Limited, are responsible for their own pre-application consultation engagement, for which I am afraid I can't answer on their behalf, but I think as set out within the report, they undertook consultation on the previous scheme wildly. Sorry to hear if that particular resident doesn't feel that was satisfactory.
Thank you.
Councillor Perez, do you have anything further?
No, not for now, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Carmel, can I come to you next? Councillor Carmel, I think you had your hand up earlier. Would you like to speak, or do you have any questions on this application? Okay, Councillor Carmel's still in the meeting, but I think perhaps he can't hear me. So if Councillor Carmel doesn't have any questions, I'll move on. Councillor Thorley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Carmel, if you do want to jump in, let me know. I've just got a few quick ones to finish off. The first question I have is on, excuse me, density. I notice that the site we state in the report is split between a PTAL 3 and a PTAL 4. The density assessment on page 55, and I notice in the addendum the PTAL of 2 has been amended to a PTAL of 4. Could officers just confirm for me, how is the site split at the moment between, if you will, the PTAL 4 and the PTAL 3? And if the assessment was done on a PTAL 3, how would that impact on the density, given we are already quite in excess of admittedly what the guidelines state?
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor. I don't have the precise split between the two PTALs to hand, Councillor. I can probably find that out in more detail if you give me some time. I think the site is predominantly within a PTAL 4, which is towards the higher end of the density matrix set out in the London plan. The precise matrix, as per the various PTALs, it would reduce slightly. I'm sorry, I don't have that precise shift in front of me, but you know, the density matrix isn't to be applied mechanicalistically. It does say that it is a general guide, and as set out within the report itself, the intent to publish London plan does have an edit by the Secretary of State in regard to density and the approach to be taken where sites are to be densified and maximised to achieve their maximum potential.
Thank you. And you can confirm then that the calculation in the report has been based off a PTAL 4, not a 2 or a 3, because it can be a bit confusing.
Mr. Wilson, are you able to take that question, or is there a highways colleague that needs to jump in for you?
No, sorry, Chair. I was just looking at the table. To be clear, the PTAL rating within the density matrix is set out as PTAL 4 to 6. So within an urban setting, for instance, there would be a range of 200 to 700 habitable rooms per hectare at a range of PTAL 4 to 6. Within a PTAL of 2 to 3, that reduced to 200 to 450. So it would be the top end of that range within the numbers itself. The proposed development has approximately 1,079, which, as is accepted within the report, is in excess of that. However, consideration has to be given to the nature of the site and its constraints, its size, location, and so on and so forth. And there is, it is considered to be acceptable that higher capacity can be accommodated within the site.
Thank you very much. If I may, Chair, I just want to move on to the children's play space, because in the last response we were told that the site is naturally constrained, and hence we're obviously proposing to build the height and the type of building we are. Obviously we're not forced to do that, but that is what the applicant has chosen to put forward. Inevitably, as is detailed in the report, there will be an element of overshadowing, an impact on daylight and sunlight into that play space that is already overshadowed to a significantly less extent than I think would be the case. Could officers tell me what assessment they have done in terms of daylight and sunlight on that space, particularly as I do notice a significant amount of the report is dedicated to the amount of, if you will, child yield from the development in the absence of any play space or amenity space within the new block?
So the question is, have officers done a overshadowing or daylight assessment on the play space that already exists?
Absolutely, and what impact, if any, has been assessed?
Do we have that, Mr. Wilson?
Within the report, the daylight, sunlight and overshadowing assessment concentrates on the residential receptors that are within the daylight, sunlight assessment that has been submitted. There is, I don't believe the report sets out an overshadowing assessment on that space itself. The overshadowing on the buildings that are to the north, which would be Frank Beswick and the Strachey building, conclude that the BRE assessments on that are generally acceptable, but the detail of that, as I say, is within the report itself. it's considered that any development that came forward is likely to have an impact in terms of overshadowing and sunlight towards the north of the site, just by its nature. However, those impacts are considered to be acceptable.
But with respect to the playground, we haven't undertaken an assessment of the playground. To the best of my knowledge, is located to the northwest of the site. In your professional opinion, if you were to put an 80-metre storey tower there, what kind of harm do you think that would cause to the daylight and outlook of that playground setting?
Mr. Wilson, are you able to answer that question, or do you not have that information to hand?
I mean, in my judgment, there would be an impact of overshadowing for part of the day. I don't have the precise hours that it would be likely to have an impact for. But in an urban setting, in an urban location, those impacts are common. They're not unusual, and I would usually assess those as being acceptable in these circumstances, as is the case here.
Okay, thank you. Chair, I promise, I appreciate we've got a big agenda. I will be very quick with the last few. My last main question relates to parking. I note that the scheme is proposed to be car permit free. Could you just explain to me how officers envisage that working, particularly in light of the fact I think there is an estate parking policy within the Clem Attlee estate. Could you just explain how that will work? Because I know that was one of the main grounds of reservation from a number of residents.
Yes, Councillor, through the chair, highway colleagues may have much more detailed knowledge. In terms of an overview, as you, I think you state, Councillor, the estate is within the council control itself. The scheme coming forward is car permit free. There are no parking spaces within it, and so those permits relate specifically to the public highway, the surrounding streets, as opposed to the council itself. Highway colleagues may well be able to expand further on the council land, the estate parking itself.
Do we have any colleagues from the highways that are able to comment any further on that?
Chair, yeah, Graham Burrell, Highways. I've got another colleague who looked at the detail of this scheme. No, we've only looked at it from the point of view of on-street parking. Was the policies of housing wouldn't be something that we would be involved in commenting on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. So just so I'm clear, because this is something that I get KG through casework, is we build new blocks, in this particular case 100% social rental or affordable unit space, and then people move into accommodation with young children, and they are not entitled to a parking permit, and they are deeply frustrated because sites they need to access do not have the same level of PTAL as here. Under the proposal we have in front of me, and I appreciate we may not have somebody from housing who can answer this, but it is the council's own scheme. I would hope we've thought about this, I'd at least like this noted. Would it be possible for residents with particular needs to potentially seek a permit on the estate? And if there is nobody who feels able to answer it tonight, can we just take that away and have a think about that as an issue? I just asked that to the committee.
Graham or Peter, are either one of you able to comment on that? I think there was something in the report about blue badge spaces, but I might be misremembering.
Yeah, I think Graham Burrow again. The parking policy for parking on housing estates would be entirely within housing's remit to do what they choose to do. The proposals for Edith Summerskill House has 2 off-street disabled parking spaces, and clearly if there was a need, clearly in terms of anybody who wasn't able to use those spaces with a blue badge, they can park free of charge on street on public highway.
Thank you for that. I think that answers my question. If housing could perhaps get back to me on their plans for estate parking, that would be appreciated.
Matt, can I just come in on that point with your permission, Chair?
Yeah, actually, Councillor Carmel, I tried to call on you earlier, so yes, please go ahead.
Yes. The report makes quite clear from my reading of it that every single new resident of the replacement for Edith Summerskill will be able to apply for an on-estate parking permit. The problem, as I see it on that, and I was going to come to this a lot later, is that means that the rest of the residents of the Clematley estates are only a limited number of parking places on the estate. In years to come, will then be applying for on-street car parking permits. And unless we control by condition who is eligible to apply for an on-estate car parking permit, then the cascade effect over the years will mean that the local residents' fears of increased parking stress on the street, as the existing residents of the Clem, who are fully entitled to apply for an on-street parking permit, are forced out because the residents of Edith Summerskill House are taking up all the estate parking permits, and this seems a rather short-sighted view being taken by the local authority. Sorry, back to you, Matt.
I just wonder if there's a response from officers on that. Is that something we have considered about the long-term implications of the pressure on on-street parking permits?
I suppose just to come in there, I think obviously that's not really a question that relates directly to this application. So,
oh, yes, it does.
Well, I can see how you're talking about a consequent impact, but I'm not sure this particular application does not include on-street parking. So I don't see how we can go.
Okay, I take the point, Chair.
Any further?
I think this is one where we are having to weigh in the balance the clear benefit that we can see from the scheme against the, I think, acknowledged harmful aspects of it. Just one quick question that I was somewhat confused about the community centre. The applicant noted in their submission that there would be a new community hall, and I quote, for use of the residents of the building and the wider Clematley estate. Can I just confirm that the community hall, I assume, will have wider public use? It will not simply be restricted to the residents of the Clematley estate. If I could just seek some clarity on that, that would be lovely.
Yes, through the chair, councillor. I can only go on the intention as stated within the submission itself, councillor, which is that it will be for a wider public benefit in terms of the residents of the proposed development and the Clematley estate. Whether that representations can be made subsequent to that, we can take those on board in terms of any legal agreement or obligation that can be a wider accessibility point. We'd be happy to do so.
Well, thank you for confirming. I think it would just be a missed opportunity if it were so restricted, but as you say, you can only go on what the applicant puts in front of you. A comment was made by Mrs. Lamont regarding fire safety, and I note that the scheme has a stay put policy and a sprinkler system is proposed throughout the building. One of the comments I think made by the GLA when they reviewed the scheme was they requested that a fire statement be produced. Can I confirm that we have produced this? And can I also ask if there are any material observations linked to this statement?
Sorry, Peter, just before you answer that question, can I just remind members to put their microphones on mute when they're not speaking? Thank you. Peter, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Thorley. A fire statement was submitted with the application in the original submission documents. This was reviewed by the GLA, as you say, within the stage 1, and there are some clarifications that they have requested from the applicant prior to the application to stage 2, should members resolve this evening to move forward for resolution of permission. The applicant is in the process of doing that. They centre around the matters as you've noted, and in general from officers, the acceptability of the fire assessment is considered to be acceptable for the stage of the design that it is. It sets out in terms of fire rated lift provision, the nature of the actual materials to be used, and the breaks and the construction methodologies and so on and so forth to go through. So we consider that the fire statement that's submitted is acceptable, and there are some minor clarifications that the GLA have asked, as I say, before stage 2, that the applicant is in the process of doing.
Thank you very much. The last question for me, I just have a comment after that, is on wind tunnelling. In the report, it was noted, I think, for the north, I may have got this wrong, so please correct me, northwest aspect of the site, that whilst there was mitigation of harmful impact, it was still felt in some models that there would be unacceptable wind tunnelling effects as part of this scheme. Could officers just explain to me, because I haven't, it's not something we've really grappled with at length at committee before, how this assessment is done and what is, if you will, deemed unacceptable. Secondly, it was noted a number of mitigation measures had been proposed which would offset this. And thirdly, what additional mitigation could be considered by the applicant if they wanted to fully comply with the modelling. Thank you.
So what assessment has been undertaken around wind tunnelling, and what is the assessment of this particular application in that regard? Mr. Wilson, do you have anything on that for us?
Sorry, Chair, I was on mute. I didn't realise. Apologies. Yes, Councillor. I mean, wind modelling is obviously a technical process. A specialist company consultant has been instructed by the applicant, as is in the case in a number of major schemes. My understanding is that a model of the proposal and the wider site is constructed and then is then tested in a wind tunnel as to the outputs on a number of areas, and a technical assessment is then concluded where, if you like, hotspots of impacts of on a range, I believe, are set out in the report about being comfortable for seating, comfortable for pedestrian walking, and so on, and those kind of environmental circumstances and experiences. In the case of this application, there is one particular spot, as you have highlighted, which is located on the boundary of the site to the northwest corner, which is highlighted as having an exceedance, even after the mitigation that is proposed through landscaping. So I think one of your points there, Councillor, was that the solution to these issues, which is obviously quite common with a lot of developments, especially in urban environments, and more so with those that involve taller buildings, is that landscaping would be introduced, trees, shrubbery and what have you, that has a mitigating effect on the wind flow itself. And that has been undertaken. Mitigation measures are set out within the wind and microclimate assessment, and they are secured to be included within the landscaping condition that has been attached in the report. And from the addendum, there is also a proposal to have that concluded within the 106 legal agreement. To go back to the spot that you have highlighted in particular, it has been highlighted that even with these landscaping measures, it would still not be comfortable enough for the pedestrian environment. I believe that where it would be located. However, it can therefore be designed out. The precise nature of that would have to come forward within the with the details to be approved, should be permission be granted. But it would be around that. It basically a landscaping measure would be put in place that you didn't actually experience that location anymore. So there would be a series of structures, or a structure to be approved, which mean you wouldn't sit there or walk through that point of the site to go through. I hope that answers the question.
No, a very detailed answer, and I thank you for that. As I say, the last thing I have, Chair, you've been very tolerant, so thank you. It's just a comment, because I fear if I don't make it, Councillor Harcourt will. It relates to pollution, and we've spoken before at committee about the concept of the polluter pays. And I would just note that it's disappointing on at the council's own application that we've fallen foul of this. I think we're making a payment of over 150,000 to offset the harmful impact this development is happening. So again, I would just make that observation that is another disappointing aspect of this scheme. But you've been very indulgent with me, Chair. That is all from me on this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carmel, I believe you had your hand up earlier. Can I come to you now?
Thank you, Chair. And I hope you will be as indulgent as me, although several of my points have already been raised.
That's good.
I'd first like to turn to the address that Mr. Turney gave to the committee. I have to say that I have been privileged enough to actually have a tour of St. Thomas's of Canterbury, which included not only the actual church, but the presbytery and the closed churchyard at the back. And the photographs of the views, I have to say, did not do justice to the beauty of the spire, especially the sundial that is, I think, unique in a Pugin church on the whatever it is, western elevation, western elevation, yes. And I have significant concerns about the effect on this fabulous and fantastic and complete architectural gem, which brings me on to the submission in paragraph 3.8 from Historic England. And I was wondering if officers could briefly tell us how much weight we should give to this very strong objection from a statutory consultee.
Peter or Alan, are you able to give committee any a steer on that? On paragraph 3.8, which is on page 42.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, as Councillor Carmel has highlighted, paragraph 3.8 does summarise in some detail the comments from Historic England, and they have highlighted their significant concerns on the impacts of St Thomas's. But in terms of the weight to be attached to their comments, I think, as Alan has previously highlighted, that they do conclude that under the terms of the NPPF, the harm is identified as being less than substantial, which concurs with officers' assessment, which has been made independently of their view and the submission and the representations that have been made.
Sorry, can I just come back to the final bullet point on page 43? It says, for the reasons set out in this letter, we consider that the development would cause serious harm to the setting of the Church of St Thomas of Canterbury, which we do not consider has clear and convincing justifications as required by paragraph 194 of the National Planning Policy Framework, particularly in the absence of the application's compliance with key local planning policies. We therefore object to this application on heritage grounds. The question I put was, how much weight should we ascribe to what is, I think, one of the strongest objections on heritage grounds that I've seen in all my years on the planning committee for an application which is recommended for approval?
Through the chair, yes, I do note your comments, Councillor, and that is the language that they use, but the actual overall conclusion that they reach in terms of the NPPF tests is that the harm would be less than substantial So whilst I do appreciate their views and the material consideration that it is, and due weight is attached to it, their actual conclusion in terms of the NPPF policy test is that it would result in less than substantial harm to the heritage asset.
Sorry, for the third time of asking.
So,
how
Councillor
much
Carmel,
weight
I think
should be attached
Councillor
to it?
Carmel, I think you've had your answer there. So
I asked how much weight, and we haven't been told how much weight. That was the question.
well, I think
emphasised the.
I think Mr. Wilson's point is that if you'll look at the third from bottom paragraph on page 42, there we have under the terms of the NPPF, this harm is less than substantial. So that's what Mr. Wilson is telling you. So I think there you have your answer. So if you want to move on to another question.
It still doesn't say how much weight we should ascribe to it, which was the form. Going on to touching on the JR and the effect on views on page 73, according to my notes, as me turning to it. In paragraph 5.3.86, the scale of tall buildings mentions Lannoy and Hartop points. They are in the process of being demolished, and therefore, given the JR that occurred, surely they should be done as a vacant site comparison, and not as the relatively tall buildings or the quite short buildings compared to this proposal should be. Is that not correct?
Through the chair, if I can take that point. So I think, so you are correct that site is currently subject to work to demolish the existing buildings. I think the comments within the report are there to set the existing context that it stands in terms of wider considerations of the principle of tall buildings within the local vicinity. So they are buildings where there are existing tall buildings on the site as present, at the point the application was deposited. So I think it is more about just a general point about context rather than a detailed point about consideration of the principle of a new tall building on that site. If that were to be considered and the building's completely demolished, then obviously we would need to consider that from the baseline at that point.
The next question is just one of clarification. I have spent many an evening in the existing community hall in Clematley, and it is a fine building, a very large and usable space. Why does the estate need a new community hall?
Through the chair, yes. I mean, I refer probably to a previous comment on a similar point. The applicant has put forward a community hall as a public benefit to activate the ground floor of the building. I think in planning terms, there are very positive benefits about the activation of the ground floor, which can often be difficult on buildings in urban settings, and the base of a building on a tall building. It's a positive contribution and a positive activation onto the playground to the north and the public realm for a number of reasons. In terms of the actual necessity of it, the applicant, as I say, has put forward it on a benefit, and it's been considered that benefit is acceptable and welcomed.
Yeah, I think it's probably.
You've muted yourself, Councillor Layton.
Thank you. You might have Scouts and Girl Guides and Bridge Club all want to have their meeting on a Monday evening, and this would allow everyone to have the community space that they need. So I'm sure we've all, from our work in our own wards, we know how vital that kind of community space is. So.
Well, I hear what you say, Councillor Layton, but the existing hall is capable of subdivision, and when I was booking it, there was never any problem, and it is a fantastic space. And as I said, many a fine evening that was in there. But it wasn't an argument against this; it was just a point. can I ask, are officers happy that this application complies with London Plan Policy 7.7? It's a simple yes or no.
Sorry, Councillor. Alan may be closer to detail to particular criteria. I think the policy context and its compliance is clearly set out within the report, Councillor.
Looking at paragraph 5.3.26, and in particular strategic A, and then under C, B, and E as well, do you feel that this application complies with that in both in form and spirit?
I think officers have actually already spoken at length about the tall building policy and the holistic viewpoint that they're taking of this application.
Well, they did it with regard to our policies as opposed to London Plan policies. So I was just shifting the emphasis somewhat.
So on page 63, paragraph 5.3.26, and which paragraphs within that are we looking at as well?
Capital A.
A for alpha.
Capital A for alpha under strategic.
Yeah.
Capital C, sub lowercase b, and lowercase c, and lowercase e.
Got you. So capital A and then capital C, and underneath that capital C, lowercase c, and lowercase e.
B, lowercase b, C and E.
E. Okay.
Bravo, Charlie, and Echo for.
And do officers have a view on how this application sits with that policy?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So just to clarify, as I mentioned before for Councillor Thorley's comments, on page 64, we do go through each of the criteria of that policy. Sorry, I don't know if you were there, Councillor Connell, but when we discussed this before, we mentioned about policy DC3, apologies, of the local plan, setting, because this isn't a plan-led tall building, that the criteria-based approach of that policy aren't applicable to this application, and therefore, in terms of providing a framework to assess the overall consideration of a tall building, we have relied upon the decision-making framework of policy 7.7 as kind of a way to go through the individual characteristics. Now, as you say, the criteria of that policy are referred to on pages 64 and 65 and 66 of the application officer report to clearly set out how we've assessed each of those elements in turn. Now, in terms of the criteria that you relate to, there are some elements that then refer into the more detailed elements of the report that refer to townscape and heritage, to actually give a bit more detail on each of those criteria. And hopefully, if members read that in kind of that succession, that will then hopefully help them to understand how officers have come to the recommendation that we have.
Yes, I mean, I read with interest some of the justifications, and in particular, I had to suppress a chuckle at 5.3.35 that this building, if permitted, would enhance the skyline and image of London. I think we can all see officers scrabbling for a justification on that one, because it would neither enhance the skyline or the image of London. On a totally different subject, can officers refresh me? It's a genuine question. What is the policy requirement for bicycle parking spaces in a car-free development? And according to my maths, this is a 405-person block. So what would the bicycle requirement be for a block of 405 people?
Graham, would that be yourself able to answer that question?
So actually, they based it on higher cycle parking standards than the current London plan, in as much as they based it on the intent to publish London plan standards. And I think the report somewhere has mentioned 224 parking spaces, but they're actually proposing 244, and that's based on just applying the intent to publish cycle parking standards. Got no relevance to being car free at all. There's no link between the two. So that would have. Let me just work it out under the intent to publish London Plan cycle parking standards. A 1-bedroom, 2-person unit has 1.5 spaces per unit, and everything else has 2 spaces per unit, and that totals 244.
So,
Mr. Simpson, it's your view that this application exceeds the minimum requirements when it comes to cycle parking?
At present, yes, is in excess of the current London Plan standards.
Thank you.
I'm grateful. That was a genuine question. It always seems to me that we always overprovide for bicycling, but I would have thought that for 405 people in a car-free development, only I make it 232 plus a few visitor parking bike spaces would be a little on the low side. Going back just briefly to the question that was raised, and is a subject that's in all of our minds as the Grenfell inquiry carries on. Am I right in thinking that there is only one entrance to this building? And am I right in thinking that far from there being sprinklers throughout, sprinklers are only being provided to the ground floor and the common areas? Is that correct?
Through the chair, thank you. On the first point, Councillor Clemmell, yes, there's the main entrance is to the east of the building under the archway, which goes into a large foyer area before going into the 2 main lift lobbies with the 3 lifts and the stair core. In terms of the sprinkler system, I wouldn't be able to clarify that, I'm afraid, for you.
Paragraph 2.9, I think you'll find.
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't catch that.
I said paragraph 2.9.
Which is on page 39.
Page 39, the evacuation strategy for the dwelling is stay put, and the common areas will be fitted with sprinklers. Therefore, I can only assume that the all the residences and non-common areas will not be fitted with sprinklers, because if they were, the report would have stated it.
Sorry, Councillor, I think I must have misheard what you said. Yes, that is what is set out within the assessment. However, although, I'm sure you would appreciate that there is a building regulations requirement for where sprinklers go to, and the design of the building will be moving forward apace with any changes to those regulations.
Yes, and when Grenfell was built, there were fire regulations as well, but that is by the by. Going back to a subject raised by Councillor Thorley in paragraph, I'll try and turn to the page now because I just wrote down the numbers. And I did it 5.11.6, which is on page
99.
Thank you for that. Part of the justification for allowing this tall building in the officer report is the increasing legibility of access through the estate. And how does that compare with having to place large planters to prevent people walking along being knocked over by heavy gusts of wind, and decreasing legibility through the estate?
Through the chair, yes, Councillor, I mean, mitigation measures around microclimate, as I said in my previous answer to Councillor Thorley, are commonplace, and the precise details of that landscaping would be required to be approved by the conditions and the planning application that have been proposed for you. In terms of mainly, they would be things like trees, and so we're talking about tree trunks. In terms of planters, I think this image, if you can see that. So in the top left corner here, we have a raised planter. It's as simple as that. It's in this kind of location within the site. It's not what easily be identified as a readily identifiable desire line through the site. It simply deals with a very precise, localised increase in the climate that's been identified within the report.
And thank you for that. The chair has been very indulgent with me, and I will just sort of finish up with a comment, if I may. I am concerned about the significant dearth of amenity space, the lack of balconies providing any private amenity space, the suggestion in the report that the children are within 400 metres of the Muga at Lancaster Court. I defy anybody to get from this building to Lancaster Court within 400 metres, and I further defy children from one estate to go and play on the Muga of another estate without being bullied. We've all seen it. It shouldn't happen, but it does. There is a significant shortfall. This is a building which proposes 405 people in there, with significant numbers of children, and I believe that the amount of amenity space available not only to the children but also to the other residents in there is substantially below the ideal.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Councillor Perez, can I come to you?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, please. How many jobs will the scheme generate during construction? And also, will they be for local people in Hammersmith and Fulham, please?
Yes, Councillor, through the chair. Set out, and apologies for any confusion that may arise from how it's set out in the addendum. There would be jobs through the construction phase that are set out. If I just bring up my own reference. So the job is the scheme is estimated as per the previous scheme to result in around 14 apprenticeships, 14 work placements, and there would also be a setting aside of 10% of the total construction cost to be allocated towards local businesses.
Thank you.
Councillor Ubori.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick comment in response to Councillor Carmel's comment on common areas and sprinklers, such an important issue. I actually read the report in a different way and interpreted common areas not just being the accessible to the community lower floors, but all common areas, stairwells, every landing, and so forth. So that was my interpretation of common areas, and I'd expect sprinklers to be in all those areas quite naturally because it is so important.
Yes, so we're saying that was my understanding as well. Councillor Carmel, you had a further question.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thank you. I just did notice one other, but Councillor Uberoy has diverted my mind from that, and I just wondered if officers could comment on. While I try and remember what my other point. Oh, I've got it. Yes, was where the sprinklers are. But the question I had was, again, going back to one of the objectors, they said that the proposed building is almost double the volume of the building that it seeks to replace. I just wondered if officers could comment on the veracity of that claim, and also let me know where the sprinklers are, because I may have misread it.
So if we could perhaps take the sprinkler question first. So the report, where does the report indicate that the sprinklers will floors?
Para 2.9, there are various references throughout the report, but the one, because it was the first one I got to, was 2.9. So when I was making my notes, that was the one that I mentioned. But there are various other references to sprinklers, but I saw nothing, and I can fully appreciate Councillor Uberoy's interpretation now that he's put it forward. But I just wondered if officers could confirm what the actual situation was on that.
Through the chair, yes. Apologies on the sprinkler. I'm just refreshing the detail of that through the actual fire statement that's been submitted. So you may have to bear with me if that's okay. In the first instance, it's a technical question that I'm not au fait with to hand. In terms of the second point, the footprint of the building, as I feel we've been clear on, the scheme has been assessed on the basis of the vacant site as it is, and not the previous building that was on the site. The existing, the proposed, floor print of the building is as so. If I bring it up in a slightly different scale, so the footprint of the building is here. The previous building is indicated around this area here. So it does move slightly further forward towards St Thomas's Way, and this part of the building does move slightly to the left over here. I don't have the precise footprint area to the current one, because, as I say, the scheme has been assessed on its own merits on the basis of a vacant site.
Sorry, yes, I accept all of that, and given that the building is 33% taller than the previous building on there, notwithstanding that it was assessed as a vacant site, that the view that it's around about double the volume of the building that was previously there is probably about right, wouldn't you say?
I guess Mr. Wilson has just said the comparison that we're making here is to the vacant site. So that we've already answered that question.
Okay, so infinity times larger then.
There you go. Did you have anything further, Councillor Carmel? Okay, just before we move to the vote then, can I check we don't have any other members' comments or questions on this particular application? Okay. In which case then, I'll now move on to voting. So if I can bring your attention to page 14 of the report, and if I can also draw your attention to the addendum as well, taking note of both. So what I'll be doing here is I will ask if each of the recommendations in the report are agreed, and then call on each member in turn to give their vote. Please respond with either for, against, or not voting. So I will start with recommendation 1 in the report, noting the addendum, which reads as follows. Subject to there being no contrary direction from the Mayor for London, that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So, Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
Against.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Thorley.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Uberoy.
Against.
Thank you. And I also vote for the recommendation, which means that recommendation is agreed. If I can then draw your attention to the second officer recommendation in the report, also noting the addendum, and that recommendation reads that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So, Councillor Ahern.
4.
Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Carmel.
4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Sadiq.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
Councillor Ubori.
4.
And I also vote for that recommendation, which means planning consent is agreed for that particular application. All right then, I can see that we are about 1 3/4 hours into our meeting this evening. We've still got 3 items, well, actually technically 4 items on the agenda. So if I can suggest that members take a 5-minute comfort break, and if David, if we can pause the broadcast. you, everyone. In which case then, if we can move on to item number 5 and item number 6, which we'll be taking together, which is St Paul's Girls' School. A joint presentation for both applications. If I can ask Sian Brown to please introduce the report. And Sian, I'll just give you a moment to share your screen.
Hello, Chair. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This item is the proposed expansion and improvement to the educational environment and facilities of St Paul's Girls' School and Brook Green. Can I draw your attention to the addendum, which primarily includes some minor changes to some of the conditions? We have also received 4 late objections from the occupiers of 32 Brook Green and a solicitor acting on behalf of the residents of Brook Green. Officers have also seen a copy of a further letter sent to members on the 27th of September from the resident solicitor. The late objections primarily relate to the maintenance building and staff hub and the impact upon neighbouring properties in terms of noise from the use, visual impact, loss of daylight sunlight, loss of privacy and impact to trees. Other comments relate to a freedom of information request and the committee date consultation. Changes have also been recommended to some conditions and an additional head of term has been requested to the section 106. All comments in relation to the planning merits of the proposals have already been considered in the officer's report. I've also received a late letter from the Hammersmith and Fulham Historic Buildings Group who support the proposals. The proposals considered tonight by members are for both planning permission and listed building consent. In summary, the proposals relate to the demolition of the Rosalind Franklin building and replacement with a 2 to 3 storey centre for design and innovation, including a glazed link and refurbishment of the adjacent unlisted Mercer's building, demolition of the Grade 2 listed Forum building and replacement with a 3-storey staff hub, internal works and reconfiguration of spaces within the Grade 2 listed main building, landscaping and reconfiguration of the car park, including the erection of a new maintenance building and other associated works. It's worth noting that the pupil numbers would not increase as a consequence of this development. The slide in front of you provides the existing site plan of the main school site. The site is located on the south side of Brook Green and is within the Brook Green Conservation Area. The site itself consists of a complex of buildings including Grade 2 listed, listed curtilage buildings and unlisted buildings. The main school building here and the Forum, which is a former gym, date from 1903 and are Grade 2 listed. The Rosalind Franklin building here, which is a former swimming pool building, was completed in 1909 and is a listed curtilage building to the main school building. The music wing and the High Mistress's House, which is number 48 Rowan Road, were completed in 1913 and are both listed separately as Grade 2 listed. The Science Building here was completed in 1933 and is a listed curtilage building to the main school. Subsequently, the school has continued to expand, including the construction of the Celia Johnson Building here in 1983, the Mercer's Building here in 1994, the Sports Hall in 2000, and more recently the Garden Building, which was completed in 2018. These modern buildings are not statutory listed, not on the local register of buildings of merit, and nor are they considered as non-designated heritage assets. Vehicle access to the site is from Brook Green to the north, and this leads into a car parking area which provides 38 parking spaces. Servicing and deliveries are from Brook Green into the car park, and refuse collection is from on street. The immediate area is predominantly residential. The terrace of cottages along Rowan Road here to the west are Grade 2 listed, and the houses on Brook Green to the north here are buildings of merit. Further to the east here, we've got Lamenia and Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School. This slide shows an aerial view of the existing main building. Highlighted here is the Rosalind Franklin building, and here is the Forum building, and it's these two buildings which will be demolished and replaced. In summary, the Rosalind Franklin building was a former swimming pool, and it's since been subdivided internally to create workshops, maintenance and storage facilities. The Forum building here has also been subdivided internally since its use as a gymnasium ceased, and has been used as a sixth form centre and subsequently as offices. This slide shows an aerial view of the new buildings shown to either side of the main building. Here to the west, the two-storey Rosalind Franklin building has been replaced by a 2 to 3 storey Centre for Design and Innovation, and this includes a glazed link between the new building and the main school building, as well as a glazed link between the new building and the existing Mercer's building. The 2-storey Forum building has been replaced by a 3-storey staff hub here, again with a glazed link between the new building and the main school building. To the far east of the car park, you will see the single-storey maintenance building, which is adjacent to the gardens of the properties on Brook Green, as well as the Lamania and Sacred Heart Catholic Primary School. Starting with the Centre for Design and Innovation, or CDI building for short, this is the view from the central courtyard. You've got the main school building here to the right and the science building here to the left. What you can see from this view is the proposed CDI building and the existing Mercer's building here with the glazed link in between. This visual provides an idea of the interior of the building and illustrates the school's vision for openness and transparency between the CDI, the circulation route and the main building. This slide shows a view of the CDI building from the gardens of Rowan Road to the west. What you can see here is the existing brick wall, which runs the full length of the boundary. At the moment, it's topped with a semi-planted weld mesh fence. As you can see from the proposed image in front of you, the wall will be retained and the weld mesh fence will be replaced by a stone wall with green roof of the CDI building. And this is where the existing Rosalind Franklin building sits. Further to the south, where the Mercer's building sits, the weld mesh fence will be replaced by some timber vertical screening. This is a cross section which is quite useful, which compares the relationship of the existing Rosalind Franklin building in red here and the proposed CDI building in black just here, and its relationship with the properties on Rowan Road here. The red line you can see at this point is the existing fence which will be removed. And what this diagram shows is that for the most part, the CDI building adjacent to the boundary will be lower than the weld mesh fence it replaces. The line you can see here shows that the building would sit below the 45-degree line when drawn from the top of the existing boundary, which is approximately 2 meters high, and it would only marginally impinge the line when drawn from the ground level of the boundary. When viewed from the windows of the neighbouring properties, the mass of the new building will be almost similar to the existing Rosalind Franklin building and will be seen against the backdrop of the main building here. Moving on to the staff hub, this is the view of the new staff hub from the car park. You can see the main school building here and the Celia Johnson building just behind. This is a view of the new staff hub from the central courtyard. And as you can see, this is the glazed link between the new staff hub and the main building here. This is a section through the new building. As you can see, the building is 3 stories, although most of the lower ground floor is below the visible ground line of the adjacent car park here. In summary, the staff hub will provide a new centralised working environment for the school's staff, as staff are currently dispersed across several spaces in the school. This is an internal view of the glazed link between the new staff hub here and the main building. And this route is now fully accessible with floor levels rationalised and a lift at the end here, which will cater for any changes in level with the external courtyard. This is a view of the existing main building here and the planning forum here from Brook Green, and this has been taken in winter. And in comparison, this is the proposed view from Brook Green with the proposed staff hub. It's worth highlighting that one of the key drivers of the proposals is to improve accessibility. What the following slides show is a comparison of the existing and proposed school buildings in terms of accessibility. So on this plan, what you'll see is a large number of red dots, and what these show are the stepped access where there's no lift provided. The two green squares you can see here show the lift location. Again, if I show you the upper ground floor, similar, lots of areas where there's stepped access and no lift provision. In comparison, you can see the proposed plans that the school now benefits significantly from step-free access routes throughout and between the main building and the new buildings, and this is shown by the orange lines here. And again here on the upper floor. This plan shows the reconfigured car park. In summary, the existing car park will be modified to improve service access and security, as well as accommodate the new maintenance building, which is here in the corner. The existing gates off Brook Green up here will be set in by 6 metres, and this is to allow a vehicle to pull into the school off Brook Green and wait on off street before access to the school is facilitated through an intercom. Once they're allowed into the site, a secondary sliding gate here will provide the schools in a secure line. The maintenance building will accommodate the school's in-house maintenance team, which has been relocated from their current space in the Rosalind Franklin building. This is the proposed maintenance building. There have been a large number of objections received from residents of the properties on Brook Green, and this is to do with the scale of the building, the design of the building, noise generated from the maintenance building. And although the original concept of the maintenance building was considered acceptable by officers, the school have taken the comments of residents on board and revised the proposals. In summary, the school have lowered a section of the building closest to the boundary here. They have removed any plant from the roof. They have removed a side window that was originally proposed along this elevation. And they've also updated the supporting acoustic report to include additional background noise measurements. This plan shows the proposed maintenance building in relation to the rear elevations of the properties on Brook Green here. The gardens are approximately 20 metres long. As you can see, the building is revised does not breach an angle of 45 degrees taken from the top of the existing wall, and in turn would not cause an unacceptable loss of outlook. As we close the presentation, I draw your attention to the overview of the heads of terms. As we will hear from the High Mistress, the school already has extensive links with local schools and organisations and hosts a number of partnership activities, events and workshops throughout the year. The Community Use Agreement and Community Use Management Plan will be secured by a legal agreement to formalise the existing arrangement and also to extend the new facilities to the wider community. In addition, there will be the usual provision of a travel plan, as well as climate change contribution and Section 278 works. In conclusion, officers have set out in the report the assessment and reasons for the recommendation that planning permission and listed building consent be granted this evening by members of the committee. The proposal is considered to accord with the development plan as adopted at local and regional level and any other material considerations. The scheme is considered to be a high quality development, and the principle of safeguarding the long-term use of the site as a school is strongly supported by the NPPF and development plan. There are a number of design, heritage and public benefits which are considered to outweigh the less than substantial harm to any heritage asset that have been set out and assessed within the report. A summary of the benefits is provided on the slide in front of you, and these include improved educational environment and facilities, improved inclusive access, improved safeguarding of the site as a school, heritage benefits of the listed building through the internal modifications. The proposals safeguard the optimum viable use of the listed buildings as a school, and finally, community outreach secured under the Section 106 agreement. On this basis, and considering all the representations and material considerations, it is recommended that planning permission and listed building consent be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you. Okay, in which case, if I can now call on our speakers in objection to this application. So I have a Mr. Hillsley, a Mr. Fumicelli, and a Ms. Christine Herwood. And I believe that Mr. Hillsley, you will be beginning. I can allow you to speak for up to 2 minutes each. And I'll be keeping time, and I'll let you know when that time is up. So if I can start by Mr. Hillsley, whenever you're ready.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. I'm a neighbour of St Paul's Girls, live adjacent to the current car park where the maintenance block is proposed. And I'm speaking on behalf of all the neighbours along this section of Brook Green who back onto the school and who've also objected. I'd ask you not to pass these plans as they stand and with these conditions, as they contain failings and would have a significant and unnecessarily negative impact on all of us in this community. We're not asking you to refuse the applications, but we're saying that these issues should be carefully addressed before any question of grant. On the crucial issue of noise, we currently enjoy peaceful homes and gardens. We appreciate that living next to schools means there's noise at certain times of day, but the tranquility we enjoy during evenings, weekends and holidays is precious to us all. The acoustic report in this application, however, despite the revisions, is still flawed and has been unsatisfactorily reviewed by council officers. We request that you insist that these noise issues are properly investigated, as per Danny's comments in a moment. We've looked to engage with the school to improve the plans, participating in their consultation and disclosing all of our concerns. But sadly, these efforts have all been ignored. The general public support they therefore claim is disingenuous. A large number of local residents have changed their view from the consultation stage because the plans the school showed us then and the promises they made during this consultation have not been kept. They promised us a modest maintenance building which would be operated very conservatively. But what they then applied for is an unnecessarily tall, dark industrial building which will dominate our gardens and which they want to operate 7 days a week. This isn't appropriate in a residential conservation area, and the timing of operation is wholly unnecessary. The new staff hub is also overlooking our private gardens, and we've been offered no protection from this intrusion by frosted glass or angled windows.
Okay, Mr. Hillsley, that's your time, I'm afraid. That's your 2 minutes. So if I can move on to a Mr. Fumicelli, if you would like to unmute yourself, Mr. Fumicelli, and Mr. Hillsley, if you could just put yourself on mute for me. Thank you very much. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, sorry, my name is Danny Fumicelli. I'm an acoustic consultant. You should have seen my specialist noise report, which was circulated with Ms. Herwood's letter. My concern is that as a committee, you're being asked to decide on a scheme without having full knowledge of all the evidence that you need to be able to make a properly informed decision as to whether the borough's preferred noise conditions can be complied with. There are 4 key areas that I think there are problems. The first one is the background noise levels presented in the noise assessments submitted by the applicant aren't really representative of the conditions at the rear of properties on Brook Green. They just didn't survey for long enough or at the right times. The second point is there isn't really any consideration of the particular characteristics of sound and noise that can enhance its impacts. tones, to impulsive elements. These can really increase the effect of noise, and they really aren't considered. One of the conditions at the moment looks at using fixed noise levels as a way of trying to manage and control sound. Again, this is inappropriate for the kind of noises that are likely to come out of the maintenance block and the CDI, which are very likely to have these characteristics which add to the bother and the impact of the noise. And in my view, the proposed noise conditions really do need to be amended, so you get proper control of all the various noise sources that are going to be introduced here. I think there needs to be a condition requiring a report to be submitted and approved prior to the implementation, the operation of any scheme that you permit here. That report can address these issues around the characteristics of sound and how you deal with noise impacting in garden type areas. And I think that's really quite important, because if that isn't done, there's a danger here that you're going to have an issue with a long ongoing issue that will not resolve itself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fumicelli. Okay, if I can now invite Christine Harewood to address committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Christine, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I hope that you've all been able to consider my letter of yesterday and Mr. Fumicelli's report. On pages 3 and 4 of my letter are the changes to conditions that we ask for. There is nothing controversial there, nothing that should be controversial to the applicant even. We ask that you direct officers to liaise with my clients and the applicant about any issues on conditions that remain outstanding at the end of this evening. Points that we have highlighted include the benefits that light materials for the outside of the maintenance block have. You saw the drawing in the officer's presentation. It's very dark, it's very oppressive, very looming to the back gardens adjoining it. Revisions to the noise conditions, we've put forward detailed wording changes as recommended by Danny Fumicelli, our noise expert. We'd also ask for no weekend use of the maintenance building so that residents aren't disturbed at the weekend when they wouldn't expect to be disturbed by a school, and particularly given all the noisy equipment and activities that could be taking place in the workshop. Another point, no use of flat roofs as roof terraces, please. The recommended condition only addresses operational works. It doesn't actually stop people using them. Now, as there's to be a section 106 as part of this recommendation, the planning permission would not be issued tomorrow anyway. So there's plenty of time for further tidying up so as to try and address the concerns of the adjoining community in ways that shouldn't trouble the school. We seek an additional head of term for the Section 106 agreement, the establishment of a community liaison group so as to ensure that there's a real discussion between the school and its neighbours as this substantial development proceeds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Harewood. If you can put your microphone on mute for me, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, in which case, if I can now invite Sarah Fletcher to address committee. Sarah, you have 6 minutes in which to address committee if you wish to do so. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee. So I'm Sarah Fletcher, the head at St Paul's Girls' School, and I'd like to begin by thanking officers for their report recommending approval for the next phase of projects in the school building's master plan. The submission is based upon a holistic master plan that has been developed between 2011 and today. It aims to support our school with buildings fit for the future while preserving the heritage that we have the good fortune to enjoy. Phase 1 has been delivered, and the school is very grateful to the council for their help in making sure that we were able to support both the school and the community in its conception and design. We're delighted that the new sports pavilion has been awarded the Hammersmith Society Nancy Golden Award for improving the local environment. St Paul's is also extremely grateful to the team at the Council and the architects and consultants on the design team for their professionalism and attention to detail in preparing for the next 2 phases. The master plan was phased to allow it to develop and respond to the changing educational landscape. There have indeed been significant changes in these last 10 years, including a much tighter regulatory and compliance regime, a stronger focus on pastoral care and more stringent safeguarding standards, our growing desire that the school should be more accessible and better able to work in partnership with local schools and the communities around us, and a recognition that women have an essential role to play in the development of technology and engineering in this country, and that a girls' school without significant technology is outdated and gender stereotyped. During the pause since phase 1, we've made adjustments to meet these expectations. The plan deals with the same buildings as in our original submission, but repurposed and with adjustments to improve accessibility as well as circulation and flow when working in partnership. We're not standing still while we wait for these plans to materialise. This month we launched the West London Partnership, bringing together 9 state and independent secondary schools to collaborate, share resources and promote best practice in education. And in the past year we've worked with 200 primary and 300 secondary school students from local schools, as well as providing significant support for food banks and for schools seeking IT equipment during lockdown. We are developing the technology courses, staffing capability and local links to bring the Rosalind Franklin building alive as a centre for design and innovation. Our aspiration is to prepare all our students for a world increasingly shaped by technology, by equipping them with the requisite knowledge and skills, and by inspiring in them the confidence and ambition that will help them to shape the future. We would like to extend this aspiration to partners in our community as well. A detailed scoping exercise looking at all our options and has informed our decision to redevelop the Rosalind Franklin building to meet this need. Our submission is rooted in the practical and essential needs to meet these objectives, as well as having to address some significant limitations presented by a building constructed in 1904. So the plans before you this evening have been developed through widespread consultation, including a number of pre-application meetings with your planning, design and conservation officers, consultation and site visit with Historic England, a presentation to the Council's design review panel, a review of the plans by the Disability Forum, meetings with local councillors and representatives from the Friends of Brook Green, and 2 public consultations, as well as meeting with neighbours at their request and responding with design adjustments. Addressing our neighbours specifically, we take our responsibility to our community very seriously, and with our design team considered all options open to us in recognition that we are an active and vibrant school and that we exist in a residential neighbourhood. We do need to address long-standing and essential safeguarding, security and operational needs with regards to our maintenance facilities and propose that we move them to the car park. In response to our neighbours' concerns about the maintenance building in particular, we have amended the design of the building, agreed an hours of use condition to limit workshop hours within the building, and briefed our design team to ensure all reasonable acoustic measures are taken to limit disturbance to both neighbours and our own offices and classrooms. And just to clarify, it is not intended to be operational 7 days a week. We are grateful to our neighbours and the local community for their input. We're aware that we do not always get things right, and over the years we have made changes to address our neighbours' concerns while having to meet the operational needs of the school. We are confident that the measures above, along with a reduction in car parking, better managed vehicle activity and improved landscaping, will in fact bring benefits to this area of our site for all of us. To conclude, our plan set out how we can achieve a whole site solution, ensuring that a school which was built over 100 years ago and at that time intended for only 400 students can continue to flourish for many years to come. Importantly, we have ensured that these plans allow us to do much more to open our doors to students from our local community. We therefore ask that the application is approved in accordance with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to all speakers addressing Planning Committee this evening. Thank you for your time. If I can call on Councillor Harvey now to address committee. So Councillor Harvey, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and welcome to Planning Committee. Councillor, you do have unlimited time, but as always, your brevity is appreciated. So whenever you're ready.
I'll do my best to keep it short, Rachel. Okay, so my objections are on behalf of the residents of Brook Green, and the key objections really are around the maintenance building and the staff hub. In regards to the maintenance building, this will have significant impact on the residents of Brook Green. Currently, as you've seen, there is no building there, but a building will be erected which will be visible and twice the size of the residents' garden walls, and it will border the homes by the gardens and Larmiere and Sacred Heart Primary School, where there's a quiet room. Residents have real concerns regarding the noise and the accuracy of the acoustic report, and you've heard from Danny about that. I note that the school have said that the maintenance building area will be used for incoming deliveries and visiting contractors, and as a consequence of that, that means that there'll be a significant amount of traffic, people and vehicles or bulky objects being moved around in that area of the school where previously there was none, and it will create noise as a consequence of that. So in addition to the noise within the building, there's going to be a lot of noise outside the building. I don't believe that seems to have been factored in when considering the harm to the residents. In relation to the operating times of the maintenance building and the workshop, I've read that the workshop will be 8 till 5 p.m, but the maintenance building itself will be 6 a.m. in the morning until 8 p.m. at night. And that's a significant amount of time where people will be visiting it, deliveries will be coming and going. It's very early in the early hours of the morning where people are sleeping, and it's going to cause disturbance for residents, which is quite antisocial. The length of time the building will be operating from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. is some 14 hours. So that's an awful lot of disturbance throughout the whole day, majority of the day, and all year round. So it's going to be relentless. In regards to privacy, the report looks at whether or not people can see out of the building, and it's actually now going to be forward facing. However, it doesn't appear to factor in the amount of people that will be visiting that area of the school where the residential homes are, that people will be outside the building, moving around the building, hanging around it, and that will have an impact on people who want privacy and to enjoy the garden in a nice, quiet environment, and they will no longer be able to do that due to visitors and deliveries. In regards to the staff hub, this presumably is going to be having 230 staff using it, and as you heard about concern around the windows and it overlooking residents' homes, this will have significant impact on residents' privacy with 230 staff using it. Currently, they do not have to endure that level of that happening to their home, and the staff hub will cause that problem for them. Two final points I would like to make relate to the consultation. That residents have informed me that during the consultation, the images of the maintenance building they were shown was much smaller in size compared to those submitted in a planning application, which changed significantly and the building size increased. And this has led to a breakdown in trust and a sense of unfairness. And also, in addition to consultation, I have read that there was a large amount of positive feedback around the proposals, but when you look at the school's analysis of the people that provided that feedback, the vast majority appear to not live in Avonmore, Brook Green or Hammersmith and Fulham Borough, and therefore will not really be greatly impacted by any impact on noise, nuisance or privacy. The majority of feedbacks come from parents whose children are at school and therefore have a vested interest. So it's clear during the application stage that a high number of residents living in Brook Green have objected, and that includes the local primary school. So for those reasons that I've just stated, I do object to the planning application as it stands, and I request that greater measures are put in place to protect all of the residents that will be adversely impacted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you for coming on to address committee this evening. Okay, if I can now move on to members' comments and questions, or hopefully mostly questions. Are there any councillors or members who would like to kick us off? Councillor Harcourt.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, one of the key points that's come across from the various presentations is this issue of noise. And I was particularly concerned about hearing there seems to be confusion over the times of operation for the maintenance building, whether it's 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. or whether it's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So firstly, can we clarify that? And if officers at the same time could explain to me what conditions are in place to make sure that there's no noise emanating from that building.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for that, Councillor. Just to clarify the hours of use of the building. So the building is under condition 46. Is to be used can be used between 6 a.m. in the morning till 8 p.m. at night. However, there's a restriction within that condition which states that the workshop shall only be used between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. In terms of mitigation for noise, I'm just wondering if I can ask Philip Smith, our Environmental Protection Officer, to answer that question.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Sorry, Councillor Harcourt, are you specifically referring to the conditions that are recommended for noise control?
Well, no, I'm listening to the concerns raised by residents and one of the ward councillors regarding the potential impact of noise coming from that particular building. So I'm looking at what mitigation measures are in place.
Okay, so
if there's anything we could do to strengthen that further, because obviously there is a major concern about that. And indeed, the other issue, of course, is there's La Meunier Primary School next door, and it's the quiet room, which is adjacent to this new building and perhaps not be quite so quiet.
Yeah, so there was a report submitted which made an assessment of noise from the maintenance building. They used a reference and angle grinder, so a reference noise of worst case scenario of the plant that will be used, and designed a scheme of sound insulation to ensure that those noise levels were at least 10 decibels below the background. And I take Mr. Vermicelli's points regarding what more can be done. There can always more that can be done. It's whether it's proportionate to the scale and use of the building. I think that's the main issue. So I know there's comments around other uses and other noises. It's quite difficult because there's not a clear British standard which to use. If you can take a worst case scenario and design a building to contain noise from there, you should be okay on the noise generation from the building as a whole. But again, there is always more you can do. It's whether it's proportionate to do that.
Councillor Harcourt, do you have anything further on that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Then equally, again, looking at the concerns raised by our speakers tonight, the other one, of course, is the issue of overlooking, and the staff hub is the one. Are the windows that are on presumably the east elevation that overlook their gardens, the residents' gardens, are those permanently obscure glazed, or are they open, clear glass?
Okay, through the chair, I can answer that. So it's acknowledged in the report that the existing forum building doesn't have any windows which face into the car park or to the gardens of the properties on Brook Green, and the new staff hub would introduce an opportunity for overlooking. However, the windows are more than 18 metres away from the nearest habitable room windows of the nearest property on Brook Green, and as such, any loss of privacy is considered to be reasonable. It's not considered reasonable to ask for any mitigation measures such as obscure glazing in this instance, on the basis that it does comply with one of our policies for window to window distance.
Yeah, no, I understand the issue about window to window, but privacy isn't limited to inside the house, is it? There is, people have got gardens, they enjoy that. Given the current situation that we're in, the use of the outdoor areas become much more important. And so I think, we need to consider that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is something that should be considered. I think in this instance, because of the distance, there are also windows within the main school building which face onto the gardens of Brook Green. And given that this building would primarily be used sort of within school hours during the week, I think it would be unreasonable to request any mitigation measures for loss of privacy.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for now.
Thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Do I have any other members' comments or questions on this application? Yes, Councillor Carmel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Members who've been on this committee for a while may remember my comments on the phase 1 of the development programme for the school, where I commended the community consultation as being one of the finest I've ever seen. Sadly, this is not a situation that I can repeat with regards to the community consultation on this particular application, and I do accept that there are constraints that have been placed on all applicants due to the current situation with the coronavirus. Just for clarity, that was a comment, by the way, can you tell me that do the current buildings have any controls on their hours of operation at present? And under this application, are they being extended, or are they indeed for the first time having constraints put on them for the first time?
Sian, is that something that you're able to answer, or no? Do the new...
I can only assume that the existing buildings, by virtue of their historic nature, don't have any controls on the hours of use. There may be conditions on the new buildings. However, I wouldn't like to confirm that because I'm not entirely sure. We haven't put any conditions about the intended the hours of use for the new buildings. The only condition for hours of use that we have applied is that to the maintenance building.
Thank you. Yes, I assumed because it's actually quite unusual to have controls on the hours of use of a building, that the situation was that in effect, if they so wished, in the existing smaller mass building, should they wish to, they could operate them on a 24-hour basis. But going back to the question of the fence, and I think called a sort of chain link fence at the moment, is that semi-permeably visible? Because I understand the new planters are going to be, the new wall is going to be lower than the existing fence. But is it currently a solid, impenetrable fence, or are there views and glimpses that are available through the existing, or is it semi-permeable and the new, although more brutalist replacement going to be more impermeable than the existing?
Okay, I think I've actually got a photo of the boundary.
That'd be useful, thank you.
Bear with me. It's taken from a different view to the previous image that you've seen. Just bear with me, please. Thank you.
That's fine, Sean. Take your time.
Okay, I'm hoping you can see that.
We can, thank you.
So as you can see, it is a weld mesh fence, and obviously residents have got plants growing up it to, I guess, to make it look a little bit nicer and to also to screen the school buildings behind. At the moment, there's an alleyway which runs between the existing Rosalind Franklin building and the boundary wall. So as well, that would probably sort of limit any sort of noise or potential loss of privacy as well for neighbours. So any planting that is on there, it's from the residents.
Do you, with your permission, Chair, do you have a view of the proposed elevations from a similar angle so we can compare and contrast? I know that's a tough ask, but you never know. You might have it hidden away somewhere.
Unfortunately, I don't. The only image I've got is from the view looking the other way from the south.
Could I have a look at that, please?
Yep, just bear with me.
Yeah,
of course,
take your time, Sean.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Can you possibly use your cursor to indicate where you feel that the existing fence line is, please?
Yeah, so, well, actually, if I show you this drawing, which is the one I showed you in the presentation,
yes.
This red line here is the existing fence, which is on top of the boundary wall. This is the top of the boundary wall, and this is the top of the weld mesh fence. So the building, for the most part, along the boundary with the Rosalind Franklin building, although it will come up to the boundary, it will actually be lower than the existing weld mesh fence.
So could you possibly, just to avoid any semblance of doubt on my behalf, go back to the previous picture and then hover your cursor where you think that the existing fence height is?
It's probably just around here.
So this is marginally lower, although the sort of brutalist planters in the way form a more solid mass. Would you say that was a fair comment?
Yeah, it is replacing what's a semi-planted weld mesh fence with a solid structure.
Thank you.
Councillor Carmel, do you have anything further?
Not at this stage, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask if any other members have any questions on this application? Bear with me. I can't see any raised hands, but that might just be that you're not appearing in my view. Oh, Councillor Sadiq, please go ahead. Councillor, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. As compared to previously, apart from noise and the light issue, what sort of negative impact this and development will have to the local resident? If the officers can take us through just briefly, apart from the noise and timing, sorry, what sort of negative impact it will have on the local residents, this development?
Okay, thank you through the chair. In summary, in terms of the impact to residential amenity, the application was supported by a BRE assessment, which confirms that the new development would accord with the requirements of that. There would be, in terms of the CDI building, there would be no loss of privacy. This is because of the privacy screen that is going to be erected, and also in terms of the opaque glazing, obscure glazing that would be installed to the roof of the glazed link. In terms of the staff hub, as I've mentioned previously, due to the distance of the new windows and the gardens and windows within the residential properties of Brook Green, it's considered that there wouldn't be undue loss of privacy in that respect. In terms of traffic generation, they're not proposing to increase the number of students at the school. And in terms of noise and disturbance, which I think was mentioned by one of the residents from the servicing deliveries, the servicing and delivery operation will continue as it does at the moment. However, we do have a condition to request a servicing and delivery plan to be submitted for approval by offers separately, because we would now, I guess, have the opportunity to consider the servicing and delivery arrangements that currently occur at the site. Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Did you have anything else?
No for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on this application? Okay. Any other questions before I move to the vote? No. Okay, in which case, bear with me, because I'm going to be taking you through 2 applications and 2 sets of voting, so just be patient with me. So I'm going to be taking each application in turn. I'm starting off with item 5, and the officer recommendation for that you can find on page 114. So if I can draw your attention to recommendation 1 in the report on page 114, also noting the addendum. And that recommendation reads that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So I'll be taking each of your names in turn, if you just let me know if you're for, against or not voting. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uboroy.
For.
And I also vote for the recommendation. So if I can draw your attention to recommendation 2, also noting the addendum, and that reads that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And Councillor Uboroy.
For.
And I also vote for the recommendation. So that is that application agreed and application approved. If I can now move on to item 6, which is our listed building consent, which you'll find on page 186. Also noting the addendum. So if I can draw your attention to recommendation 1 there, which reads that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant listed building consent subject to the conditions listed below. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uboroy.
For.
And I also vote for that recommendation. And then if I can draw your attention to recommendation 2 in the report, also noting the addendum, which reads that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So, Councillor Ahern. Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
Sorry, 4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Sadiq.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
Councillor Uberoy.
4.
And I also vote for the recommendation, so that is that application approved as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, in which case then, if we can move on to item 7, which is 104 King Street. And if I can ask the presenting officer, John Sanchez, to please introduce the report. John, I'll just give you a moment to share your screen.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'm the presenting officer for this item at 104 King Street in Hammersmith. Before I start, I would like to draw the members' attention to the end of the addendum list. There are 2 minor corrections to draw your attention to in respect to the committee report. The committee may recall that last year they considered a detailed planning application for a small office development on this site within Hammersmith Town Centre, which provided small office space and local employment opportunities. The committee agreed with the officer's recommendation for approval of the development following the completion of a Section 106 agreement, and the permission was issued on the 10th of January 2020. The site is located on the north side of King Street between Argyle Place and Cambridge Grove, and has access provided from King Street via Dines Place, which is here to the south of the site. The site is a vacant former timber merchant yard. It contains 2-storey brick buildings formerly used as sales and backroom offices, double height storage, timber storage structures, workshops, and an open paved area for storage and loading and unloading. Only a small section of the site, which is in the northeast corner, falls within a conservation area, and that's the Bradmore Conservation Area. To the south, we have the Hammersmith Town Hall Conservation Area, which bounds the site along King Street. The site is bounded mostly by residential properties in Argyle Place and Cambridge Grove, and by commercial properties with residential above along King Street. The scheme before committee tonight is a resubmission of the approved planning application that went to committee last year, with amendments following a detailed site investigation works that were carried out and further consultation with Transport for London with respect to the viaduct along the north. This slide shows the layout of the approved scheme, which in effect involved the demolition of the majority of the structures and buildings on the site, the construction of 4 new buildings, Building A on the corner of Argyle Place, Building B, which is a run of 2-storey buildings along the rear boundary wall with Cambridge Grove Properties, Building C, which is to the north of the site, adjacent to the viaduct, and an extension to Building D, which was the former recording studio on the site. This next slide basically gives a summary of the proposed amendments to the scheme, and the main issues relate to Building A, which involves the addition of a part basement level. Building A, again, with regard to providing a glazed link between Building A and Building B. Dormer windows on the roof level, 2 additional dormer windows on the roof level Building A. There's an addition of a small single-storey glass reception of the entrance, and then the alterations to building C, which effectively, as a result of discussions with Transport for London, involve moving the building 1.5 metres away from the viaduct. So this is the proposed layout, and in summary, the basement is proposed under building A here, the glass link between building A and building B, and then this is the alteration to building C with the 1.5 metre gap from the viaduct and the addition of a small single-storey link at the back here adjacent to building B. This is the basement plan beneath building A, and it doesn't cover the full extent of the building, and one of the main reason why this has been introduced is because the ground level is made ground, and it would effectively need to be replaced, and the applicant has opted to carry out a basement beneath part of that building. And lastly, I just want to show you a CGI image of building C from Cambridge Grove. So the proposed Section 106 agreement is set out in detail in the heads of term, which confirm that the applicant will be providing an additional financial contribution of £4,400 towards employment and training initiatives. Officers hereby recommend the full planning application for approval, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement and the conditions as per the 2 recommendations set out in the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. We don't have any speakers on this item, so I can move straight on to members' questions. Are there any members with any questions at all on this? Councillor Thornley.
Just very briefly, Chair, and it's a comment. I mean, we've seen this application. I think I first remember seeing it about 7 years ago. I think what we have before us tonight is a good scheme, and that's why I voted for it the last time it came before us. The 2 major changes I can see in terms of building A, I think adding in bike provision and additional shower facilities in the current environment is very encouraging. And I think setting back building C is a very encouraging step. So I fully intend to vote for this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thorley. Any other comments or questions on this application? No, I can see lots of shaking heads. Okay, wonderful. In which case then, I will move straight on to the vote. So just like last time, I'll be asking if each of the recommendations in the report are agreed, and then I'll call on each member in turn to give their vote. And if you can just respond for, against, or not voting. So the first officer recommendation is on page 228. If I could draw your attention to officer recommendation 1 there, also noting the addendum. And that recommendation reads that the committee resolves that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So, Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uberoy.
For.
And I also vote for the recommendation. Okay, if I can draw your attention to recommendation 2 there, also noting the addendum, and that recommendation reads to authorise that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So, Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For, Chair.
Councillor Uberoy.
For.
And I also vote for the recommendation. So that is that application approved. And we move on to, oh, bear with me. Which one? Michael Road. Thank you. There we go. So item 8, Michael Road, and if I can call on Roy to please introduce the report. Roy, I'll give you a moment to share your screen.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, you're ready. Ready to go.
So I'll just take you to the addendum first of all, just pointing out there are 3 minor changes on there, and one of them being a supplementary bit of information, notably in addition to page 11. In particular, it reference to the previous permission which committee saw, which was granted in 2018 for a redevelopment on this site for a 6-storey building plus basement. This particular development relates to some extensions to the existing building rather than redevelopment, and would enable the current business to continue to operate during building works, and thereby maintaining jobs on site rather than having to relocate for 2 years. Okay, so the proposal involves various elements: a 2-storey extension above the main building to provide 7 flats, and the formation of various balconies and roof terraces. Change of use of part of the first floor to create 2 flats, 2-storey rear extension to the motorcycle showroom, and then the retention of B1 at first floor. So here's the site in red. The area highlighted in blue relates to the site also owned by the applicants, and is the workshop, which actually doesn't form part of the development but forms part, if you like, of the wider application site owned by the owners. On the plans, you can see to the sort of south east corner the gas holders, which have since been removed. To the north, beyond the site, you'll see the site falls just outside but adjacent to the Moore Park Conservation Area, which is hashed in green. It's on the junction with Michael Road, which has a frontage facing the gasworks site, and Edith Row. Although the address, just refer you back to that, refers to King's Road. I think that's historic because the showroom has been there for some time. It's almost 100 years ago, and that's his historic address. So here's an aerial shot looking southwards. So the site itself is here in orange, effectively a 2-storey building with a mezzanine floor. And these are offices which were part of the gasworks site. You can see the pits that have been formed because of the removal of the gasworks. And here is Edith Road. This is King's Road, and this is a petrol station forecourt. I've just had a message saying somebody can't see the presentation. Can everybody see the presentation?
I can see the presentation.
Okay. I can see it.
So I can see it.
Yeah,
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'll continue. This is another aerial shot looking northward, and what you get is to the south, the office block, which is Cooper House, which has since been removed, and to the south of that are the pits for the gas holder site. To the north, you've got the petrol station, which is the canopy of the petrol station at Tesco, I believe it is, not advertising. And then this is Edith Row, and then New Kings Road. And then you've got a climbing centre just to the right of that, or to the east of that. This is just to try and show us a block plan. So if you like the cocoa bean shape in the middle, coffee bean in the middle, and either side is where the extensions would be. And then this is the workshop area, which is outside of the site. So the site is in red rather than this hashed blue area. This is looking at street level. So this is looking from Edith Row southwards. On the left-hand side, this sort of beige wall is a flank elevation of the service station, which is the petrol station. Then you've got obviously the Harley-Davidson workshop there and showroom with offices above. And then in the background, you've got the 4-storey offices, which are Cooper House, which formed part of the gas holder site. And on the right-hand side is Edith Row. And in the foreground there, I think it used to be Jim Thompson's former public house. This is the rear of the site from Michael Road. So you can see a 2-storey element, and then the sort of plant equipment at top floor. And then this is the warehouse building, and then the entrance to the service area. This is looking the opposite direction of
Edith Row, so looking northward. On left-hand side, you've got a new development at 1 to 3 Michael Road, which is 3-storey, and then with an extension or setback at top floor, 4th floor. And then just in the screen there, you can just about make out the application site, the orange bricks. This is Cooper House, which has since been demolished, looking eastward, and then the application site in the foreground. The reason for showing you this, if I just go back to one slide, you'll see this is Cooper House. There's that elevation which fronts Michael Road. This is the proposed and approved elevation on that same Michael Road facing the application site. So whereas with the Cooper House, it's 4-storey, what's been approved on the opposite side of the road is 6 stories, and that's the elevation that's will be implemented. Giving you a sort of wider context, and this is what was approved previously. So we had a 6-storey building, Cooper House, and then you've got the petrol station forecourt and obviously the gas holder sites sort of outlined in images. That was what was approved before by committee. This is the existing building in the top left corner, and the bottom right corner is what's proposed. So if I just take you through what's there at the moment, you'll see there's a sort of the glass showroom, if you like, which has a mezzanine floor in it, which is almost like double height. That is still retained here. And then you've got the story above, which becomes slightly more crunched with 2 stories above, and then a lift core here. An aerial shot showing basically the same thing. So you get the lift core with some balconies, the main entrance on Edith Row, and then this was where Cooper House would have been, and you can see some terraces on the top floor with some plant equipment and access to those areas. So just to give you a bit of context, on the right hand side you've got an outline of Cooper House. The dotted line shows the red dotted line shows what was approved before, and then the black line shows the outline of what was approved before in terms of its mass and height. And you can see that what's proposed essentially, what's proposed is essentially within the scope of that building, with the exception of the access core, which is adjacent to the petrol forecourt. This is on the rear elevation. So what you see there, the yellow is the workshop. This is kind of Edith Row with Jim Thompson's former pub in the outlined here. And then you've got the 2 stories above the main building, and you've got the 2 stories here, which is to the rear. This is just trying to show a typical kind of window with materials being profiled brick, some metal clad around the window, and then matching brick, which would match what is there at the moment. In terms of floor area then, what you have is this is the existing workshop, which is outside of the application site. The application site runs down this line here. The sort of pink area, coffee bean if you like, is the existing showroom. The yellow area is the extended showroom. The green area is the main access area, which will provide access to the flats above the commercial use. This is the mezzanine floor. So there's an existing mezzanine floor at the moment, which encompasses this existing showroom here. And this is the extended showroom area at the back, which forms part of that 2-storey extension. And then you've got a void here, which forms part of a double height showroom, which fronts Edith Row. On the left-hand side, there's 2 images here. The proposed floor, first floor, which essentially, for the most part, the green area is as existing in terms of the actual area covered. However, this area is currently in use as offices, and then would then become 2 flats. So it's converted to 2 flats, and then there'll be an extended area of offices to the rear. At the second floor, this is a completely new floor, so you get 4 new flats basically. So you get, if you just sort of outline them, there's 1 unit here, all of this area with the heavy black lines or heavy grey lines, another unit here, and another unit here. Another unit in this location here. Each of these would have access to a terrace or balcony area. Then to the 3rd floor, this is again another new floor, which is similar to the floor below. In this case, it's 3 flats rather than 4, and at roof level, various amenity spaces. Just to give you an idea of the cross section that's proposed, so that mezzanine floor I refer to, because of the double height of the showroom, there's a mezzanine floor that's existing here, which essentially this line here, and that's the first floor, and the two additional floors effectively this one and this one. This level is plant effectively, and this sort of black line is the outline of what was approved previously, and adjacent is the Cooper House. So in terms of what you have in front of you, you've seen this application before, and it was approved previously for a 6-storey plus basement. This application is basically extensions to an existing building, which result in a 4-storey building with no basements. Thus far, we've had no objections, only letters of support, unlike the previous scheme. In principle, the mixed uses that are proposed, either commercial and residential, were established by the grant of the 2018 permission. The retention of the established local business enables the business to continue in the borough. There are 9 new homes that are created as a result of the proposed developments. In terms of visual impact, the design is comparable with the 2018 permission and smaller in height, so it's reduced height and mass. In terms of impact on neighbours, therefore, it has even less impact than that scheme that was approved previously, so it's considered acceptable. Then regarding highways and environmental quality, in terms of it's a car-free development, 18 cycle spaces, i.e. 2 spaces per flat, and then air quality, SUDS, flood risk, contamination, all satisfactory. CO2 emissions that meets the target, 36% reduction, and then there's a Section 106 contribution of some £325,000 off-site affordable housing, which is a bonus, if you like, because the actual number of units is below the threshold. So we've managed to negotiate a contribution which sort of goes to the heart of what our policies try to do. But and we managed to secure that. And also there's a SIL contribution of £509,000. So from officers' perspective, the proposal is considered satisfactory, and we are recommending that the application be approved. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Any members' questions on this application? Councillor Carmel.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment followed by a very quick question. There is absolutely nothing objectionable to this application, and I will be voting for it. But just on a point of clarification, will the 2 planning permissions exist against each other, or will this extinguish the previous planning permission that we gave?
Through the Chair. The existing permission remains extant and is live. Obviously, it was granted for a period of 3 years. The applicants have advised that, from their perspective, the scheme is unviable, and they have no plans to implement that scheme simply because they have explored, I think, selling.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorley.
Sorry, just to get a quick question on clarification. In terms of access to the flats, I saw there was a stairwell going up to the first floor. Are we sharing access through the commercial and the residential, or do you get access to the residential through the lift? I just wasn't clear. And are there any rules about sharing stairwells between residential and commercial?
They are 2 completely separate access arrangements in play. So
no, Roy, that's fine. That's all I've heard. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Carmel, can you just pop yourself on mute for me? Thank you. Any other? No. Councillor Ibori, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I don't have any objections to this application. It's smaller in scale than the existing application that was approved a couple of years ago, and so therefore the impact is far less on local residents. The only thing I'd flag is that it's a shame we're not getting as much 106, but naturally it's a smaller scale development now, so that's inevitable. Well done for officers for negotiating the 300,000 plus, despite that not technically being a legal requirement. I have a random question. Where do we get the aerial shots from that we used through that presentation? They were very useful. Do we have a drone taking them, or were they provided by the applicant?
I can assure you we're not going out on site at the moment, so yeah, definitely taken from Google and Google Earth. And
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Brilliant. No questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other member comments or questions? No, I can see some vigorous head shaking. Okay. In which case, unless anyone stops me, I'm going to move on to the voting for this application. So you'll find the officer recommendations on page 195. So if I can draw your attention to that and to the addendum as well. The first officer recommendation there reads that the committee resolves that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant planning permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
Sorry, 4.
Councillor Carmel.
4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Sadiq.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
Councillor Uberoy.
4.
Great. Okay, and I also vote for that recommendation. So then if I can draw your attention to recommendation 2, which reads to authorise that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning of the Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So Councillor Ahern.
4.
Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Carmel.
4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Sadiq.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
Councillor Uberoy.
4.
And I also vote for the recommendation, which means that application is approved. That brings us to the end of all of our items and all of our business this evening. Thank you to everyone who attended or watched tonight's meeting. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on our website shortly. These will be formally approved at our next meeting, which will be on the 13th of October 2020. So I'll see you all there. If you have any queries concerning the applications in the interim, please contact the case officer listed in the application report. Thank you all very much for your time this evening, and I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you, Chair. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.